We are live. How is everyone doing today? We have with us the Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercouris, and we are very honored to have with us Mr. Tom Luongo joining us from the United States, I believe. Correct,
Yeah,
Tom?
absolutely.
Tom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
The hot
How are
and
you?
humid North Florida.
All right. How are you doing today, Tom? And where can people find you? I know that everyone that is watching the stream is very familiar with all your work, your
So yeah,
podcasts,
we start on
your writings, everything.
yeah.
But where is
So
the
you
best
start
place
on
for people to
Twitter
find
at
you?
TFL1728. Everything will get posted there, obviously. But my blog over tomluongo.me, and then obviously from there, you can get the link to the Patreon, where a lot of the stuff that I do now is behind the paywall over at Patreon. We do 2 to 3 articles a week privately. Sometimes they leak out into the public as reworked public stuff, and then bi-weekly market reports for where I go over the headlines, kind of like Alex does, and along with technical state of the really important markets, the Dow, gold, silver, Bitcoin, Eurodollar futures, all sorts of crazy and esoteric things that only I would decide I think is important. I don't know. So we're at that point where it's really kind of interesting to see how all this stuff is starting to play out. So.
All right, so we'll get into that in just a minute. I will put all of Tom's info. I'll actually pin it as a comment after the chat, so it'll be the top comment, and it'll be pinned up top so everyone can find all of Tom's excellent work. And let's just say a quick hello before we get started to everyone on Odyssey, on Rumble, on YouTube, and our amazing locals community, the Duran.locals.com. And one more quick hello to our moderators, our awesome moderators. Zariel, the great Zariel, is in the house. The great Lady Cosmica is with us as well. And who else do we have helping us out in the moderation? I think it's Zariel. I think Alan Watson is also helping us out over on Locals as well. And yeah, all right, cool. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Zariel, Lady Cosmica, and Alan Watson for the moderation. Alexander, I will pass it off to you. We also have some great questions from Rumble and Odyssey, and I'll get to those as well when you guys want me to read those out so that Tom and Alexander can answer those as well. Let's get started, everybody. Let's begin. Alexander.
Well, first of all, can I just say that it's fantastic to have Tom here. It's the second time I think you've been with us on the Duran, and we're delighted to have you again. And we're both huge admirers of your work. We've worked together, as Tom knows, and we can confirm on Crypto Rich's channel. But we appear together regularly there. But it's wonderful to have you on the Duran and on economic news, on the financial markets, what's going on. I mean, I think you're frankly unsurpassed. So it's a pleasure and a privilege to have you with us. Now, we're going to obviously discuss what else the world crisis at the moment. And it's a world crisis because, as Lenin used to say, everything is connected. And I'm afraid it's one thing Lenin said, which is absolutely true. I don't think anybody would dispute it. And I'm going to just actually start with a little piece from my old times as a student, a history student back in the early 1980s. 1970s, 1980s, and there was a book that we all had to study at that time, which was about the collapse of the world system in the on the eve of the First World War, the events that led to the First World War. It was one of these great seminal history books that come out every so often, which everything afterwards in history, everybody's understanding of what happened changes. And it was by a historian called Fritz Fischer. It was published in Germany. And its title was The War of Illusions, that everybody in the period up before the First World War, but primarily, by the way, in Germany, but everybody was living in a world of illusions. And they did various things, believing themselves to be the masters of the universe. And of course, it all came crashing down on their heads. And I have to say, I feel sometimes that we are reliving this, that everybody has had this extraordinary sense of where we were. At least when I say everybody, I mean, the elite people in, that Swiss mountain resort who meet in that Swiss mountain resort, some of the people in the central banks, some of the scribblers in the media, they've all been living in a kind of illusory world. And now what we're starting to see is exactly what Tom has been talking about for years, which is that world of illusions is starting to crumble around them. And just as was the case before the First World War, it's the German world, people who speak German, who seem to be at the center of this world of illusions. And it's people who speak German who dominate the discussions in Davos, to use that word straightforwardly. I mean, Klaus Schwab and people like that. It's Ursula and her friends who are running the commission at the moment. It's the Green Party in Berlin. They have been living in a world of illusions, and they've pulled us all along. So that's what I wanted to say. And I think that perhaps we can talk a little bit about military matters and what's going on in Ukraine today. But let's focus, I think, on Tom's particular area of expertise: markets, commerce, economics, because that's where the real change is happening. And I think everything is coming apart. And one very last thing, it's fascinating to see how these people, when they're faced with everything coming apart, they withdraw into what? Price controls, price fixing, centralization, all those things which they've attempted before. So over to you, Tom. And I think maybe I provide a little bit of a lengthy introduction, but perhaps you can take it from there.
Oh no, you're absolutely right, Alex. That these people are living in an echo chamber so small, you'd be able to run Hillary Clinton's campaign out of it in a brownstone in Brooklyn. So, and this is the problem, and this is what happens when you have taken all, you've just so destroyed the public discussion space, when you've narrowed the discussion space to such a small extent that you only believe that which you ingest, and you further your kind of insulation and solipsism, right? And so this is what we see it here in DC, we see it in city of London, you see it in Davos, you see it all around the world, and we've reached that kind of I don't know, singularity, right? I don't know. We've reached that moment, and this moment in time where all of these things are starting to collapse, and then they have to face the music of how they're going to deal with it. And their only response, of course, is because they're rank authoritarians, they're communists at heart. How reductionist I am about these things. I just like to name names and just call them commies because it's easier that way. Let's not get let's not get crazy about our dalliances of youth, right? So when you look at it, of course, what do they want to do? They want to control everything. They want to control the world, so let's control prices. We want to control the world, so let's control your movement. Let's control information. Let's control this. Let's not accept the fact that the information, that the bad information that they put out to everybody is no longer being accepted. Let's double down on the bad information and try and make it worse. And in economic terms, all prices are information. The entire economy runs on information. So if you muck with prices and you control prices, then you're just propagating bad behavior and you're just propagating bad information. And eventually those bills come due. So I wasn't surprised at all when I saw Biden and company at the G7 last week. And literally the biggest bunch of buffoons. I mean, was that not embarrassing? I mean, seriously, was their behavior at the G7 not embarrassing on our behalf? Okay, I just finished some work for I also write for Newsmax on the side. I don't publish it. I don't publicize it a lot, but I also write for Newsmax on the side. And a lot of the things I was thinking about for them, for the future art stuff that I was writing for them, and I've been talking with my patrons, which is the clear distinction between the behavior of the leaders who gather for St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, SPEEF, and the BRICS Summit and the G7. If you think about the way they presented themselves to the world, if you look at the way Putin handled himself for the first time speaking in public outside of the Kremlin since the war started, right? If you look at just the way they handled themselves, the professionalism and everything else that was handled at SPIEF, even Valdai to a lesser extent a couple of months ago, and now the BRICS summit, and then and just the image system of a bunch of buffoons. Like I was just waiting for them to hold up their shirts and show off their belly buttons or something like they just got out of a frat party and they're hungover and it's 6 a.m. They literally look like it was 6 a.m. They're still drunk on frat row on their way back to their fraternities. This is what they look like, and not a one of them's wearing a tie, which is a clear signal of about where their actual thinking is. Like they all just look like unkempt frat boys coming home from a party. And these are the leaders of the real world. And if you don't think that global capital, you don't think that you're the guys who run the, couple $100 million family offices or $1 billion family offices, in Europe, Hong Kong, the United States, whatever, you don't think that those people aren't looking at that going, these are the people I'm supposed to invest my future in?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, indeed.
Yeah, no.
I mean, we've actually had, can I just say, we're getting some really extraordinary questions, and they're basically, I think, mainly directed at you, Tom. So 2 questions we've just had from our viewers. The first is, have you ever seen PMIs move the euro up by 25 points and then down again the next day? And this huge swings up and down. And then this one, and I think this is an outstanding one, actually, because I was watching the interview and I was incredulous. The US Energy Secretary said today that she doesn't care about high gas prices and inflation, as saving the liberal world order is more important. Anyway,
well, yeah.
Shall we deal perhaps with the first question? I mean, have you ever experienced these extraordinary gyrations?
The PMI prints from last week were really hilarious, actually, because they just needed something to cover what was happening. They always come up with remember, 95% of financial reporting is a post basis ad hoc fallacy. The markets move on whatever they're seeing, and then Bloomberg writes the articles, or the Financial Times or whomever writes the article, and in response thinking, well, we have to come up with a reason why, and it's all post hoc fallacy. Every bit of it, almost all of it is wrong, right? And I get caught up, and we all get caught up in it every once in a while. It just happens. There's a lot going on. We just ended Q2. Today's July 1st. Q2 is always the quarter end where there's the most shenanigans played. There's a lot of book squaring that goes on. There's a lot of illusions that are broken down. There's a lot of what we call painting the tape that happens. And I've seen this multiple times. Let's go back to like 2014. I remember getting burned by this. This is why I always bring this one up. I got burned by it when I was writing my newsletter for Newsmax. And I said, oh, look, oil ended Q2, on a technical breakout to the upside. And the very next day, literally, that was on a Friday. And then Monday, and then after the July 4th holiday, they started the coordinated collapse of the oil prices from $125 a barrel down to 25 in order to try and overthrow Putin and start the ruble crisis of 2014, 6 months later. Right. Well, I'm fully expecting some kind of reversal. I was just watching this. So when I think about what happened, and this is just speculation on my part, I'm trying to read tea leaves and whatnot. But I listened to a lot of people saying there was just a lot of money had to move around before the end of this quarter. And so there was a lot of weird things that were going to happen. It's technical stuff in the plumbing of the capital markets, and that I can't cite chapter and verse on because of all the information that comes into my head on a daily basis. So I was not surprised to see major moves in the market that were really counter trend, is the point I'm getting at. Meaning we saw massive move in treasury yields to the downside, like massive treasury buying. We moved from 3.5%, 3 and 4.4% on the 10-year down to, we closed below 3 in 5 trading sessions. We moved 40 basis points in the US 10-year. Okay. Eurodollar futures markets are all over the place. Like they're moving 10, 15 basis points a day. This is not normal behavior for those of you who don't know this. Okay. I mean, to let people understand, like 15 basis point move in a 24-hour period in the Eurodollar futures curve would be like $50 off of Apple in an hour. These are happening daily with every time the Federal Reserve changes their, every time they make a move. So one of the things that I'll wrap this up real quick. One of the things that the markets are trying to do with this Q2 close is to blackmail the Fed into saying you can't raise interest rates another 75 basis points. Now, who benefits from that narrative? The very people who just showed up at the ECB's latest summit to say we're going to start a new QE program before we ended the last one and before we've even raised interest rates. That's who. But at the same time, the euro is getting crushed. I mean, European bond yields moved with American bond yields. So while the European, the European sovereign debt crisis has been forestalled, what did it buy What did it buy Lagarde? Maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month.
Yeah. We'll see. I mean, what is going to happen in Europe? Because this is, of course, the big thing. Now, here in Britain, where the mood, I should tell you, is catatonically bad. We've now had the Bank of England saying that we're going into steep recession, that inflation is going to remain high at the same time, and that our problems are going to be worse than in Europe as well. And that's, of course, from the Bank of England. Now, of course, the Bank of England never wanted us to leave the EU, so one has to take that into account. The Financial Times, which also didn't want us to leave the European Union, is now saying, why doesn't everybody say that this is all, our problems here in Britain are because of the fact that we left the European Union? They're trying to connect it, in other words, to this. We've seen, I think, the widest trade deficit that we have ever had since modern records started to be taken in the mid-1950s. And this is also supposedly the fault of Brexit. But ultimately, I kind of think that if we are going down, Europe is following us at a gatheringly fast rate. I don't really see that the differences are that great.
No, they're not. The Bank of England was the first major central bank to start raising rates. Everybody remembers. They raised a quarter point before everybody else did. Bank of Canada was next. No one cared because it's the Bank of Canada. And then then the Fed finally decided to get on board. And again, as I've mentioned many times, it's the main reason why Powell had to delay raising rates was because of the political infighting on Capitol Hill to try and keep him from raising rates. He would have started raising rates 6 months ago if he could have, but he wasn't able to politically. So the UK is in rough position for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that the pound is still terribly overvalued. $1.25 or whatever the pound is trading at this morning is still too high. The pound needs to go to $1.10. Pound needs to go to parity. Euro needs to go to 80 cents. Okay. Like let's stop mincing words here. All right. The Hungarian central bank raised interest rates 1.85% the other day. The market was expecting a quarter point. like you're a little off with your projections, dudes. So none of these people ever get anything right anyway. So what I tell you is that I'm not surprised at all that the minute the whole thing starts to collapse, that let's blame Brexit for the problem. Let's blame Putin for the problem. Let's never blame our own policies for the problem. Yeah. Let's never blame, the fact that, look, we're dealing with a very strong dollar. The dollar, I've been telling everybody for 2 years that there was going to be a massive bull market in the US dollar. I was lambasted on Twitter. I was yelled at. I was told I was an idiot and everything else. I'm like, interesting. The US dollar index just closed at 100, closed at just shy of 105 yesterday. Massive technical breakout on the quarterly and even annual charts. So we're going to see, from that perspective, the long-term charts are not telling you are in a bull market in the US dollar, which is not going to turn around tomorrow. So there's a dearth of dollar liquidity out there. The Federal Reserve has been draining the euro dollar markets for over a year now. And it's going to affect City of London because they don't have there's no dollars to move around. I talked about the disconnect between disconnecting the US banking system from LIBOR. right? USD LIBOR. So the banking rate of the Eurodollar market's no longer underwrites all the debt written in the United States. It's now indexed to SOFR as opposed to LIBOR. This is a very important shift, and for the politicians and the Bank of England to just blame it on Brexit is just pathetic, because they know what's going on. They fought all of these changes to all of these rules. They're fighting Basel III implementation like you wouldn't believe, because they don't want the physical gold market to be drained. They don't want the LBMA to go busto. Like all this stuff. This is why Biden came out and said, "Hey, we're going to boycott Russian gold. We're not going to allow anybody to refine Russian gold." That came 3 days after the Swiss. It hit the news that the Swiss were refining Russian gold in order to feed the LBMA. That's the first thing I thought of. I'm like, oh, what a shock. And I saw that, and I'm like, yeah, in about 3 days, Biden's going to turn around and go, you can't refine Russian gold anymore. Okay, so it'll go to Dubai first, then it'll go to Switzerland, and then it'll go to London, because, we're going to sanction the periodic table. But again, that's your original argument, the original question, Alex, which is that these people live in a land of illusions. They live in a fantasy world that I last I checked, you can't tag atoms of gold with NFTs or with little markers on the blockchain in order to figure out where they came from. They're just atoms of gold. Last I checked. Being a chemist and all, I would know a little bit about this.
I mean, it's the whole sanctions thing is becoming very, very, very bizarre. I mean, by the way, we had the president of Indonesia in Moscow, and he was talking to Putin.
Wow, I didn't miss that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. He's in Moscow at the moment. He's supposedly, by the way, the rumors are that he brought with him a letter from Zelensky to Putin as well, that Zelensky contacted him before he went there. He's not going there as a messenger for Zelensky, but Zelensky said, look, I want you to pass to Putin a personal letter. I don't know what's in it. Probably went straight to the
I don't know where it went, but anyway. I can tell you that the ASEAN, any of the ASEAN 5 tigers, that's Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, if any of them show up in Moscow, that is a very, very big signal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Period.
Well, he's been in Moscow. There's been a big discussion meeting between him and Putin. They were talking about various things. But the thing that came out to me is that very obviously he thinks, that's the president of Indonesia, that the whole sanctions thing is completely ludicrous. Now, well before we started on this latest sanctions splurge, which is, of course, the greatest sanctions splurge we've ever had, and I was already hearing stories from people in the maritime industry that things had become so complicated with sanctions that it was becoming very difficult to move ships and cargo around, because, if you went to, a port in one place, you didn't know whether your supplier was connected in some way with somebody else who was sanctioning and all of this. And they're making it more complicated. They've been told, try and simplify it. And they make it more complicated all the time. And of course, this is a middleman's paradise. So it seems to me. And, you were talking about, you move gold around in all kinds of ways. You can't ultimately trace where the gold is coming from. The same's happening with oil. I mean, I know this for a fact. I mean, this is Greece, where, we have the Greek shipping industry is based on. Well,
kind of the industry of Greece, at this
they're all talking about this. And, India is now doing a roaring trade, buying cheap Russian crude, refining it, selling it to, well, where do you think they're selling it to? They're selling it to Europe. I mean, it's just
they're getting it at $30 under the market. It doesn't cost $30 to ship it, refine it, put it back on a ship, and send it back to Europe. They're literally, the Europeans are now buying oil at a premium.
Yeah.
They're getting discounted Russian oil. Now they're getting it sold back to them at a premium. It's hilarious. I'm sorry, guys. It's hilarious. And I'm reading the comments, the super chats as they come in, and they're all very, 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 very,
It is. In fact, we've had some really interesting points about oil because there was one question which I didn't fully understand, by the way, but perhaps
sure you can
saw it, which
read it,
is about the amount of oil that the state of oil reserves.
The reserve, I saw that comment. So
and there was a follow-up question which was about whether this zero emissions policy by 2030 is possible. By the way, on the latter point, there's an article in the Daily Telegraph today which says, here we go, oil reserves 47 years at 97,103,871 barrels per day. How big of an issue is this? But
it is a big issue, but it's not as big. But that's known reserves. The problem is Davos's maniacal obsession with making oil uninvestable. There's plenty of oil out there.
I agree with that. Yeah,
and absent, and one of the things I was talking about with, I can't remember. I was talking about with Dave Collum the other day. I did a spicy podcast with Dave Collum and Tommy Kerrigan the other day, which for those of you with virgin ears, I do not recommend. But I'll keep it, and I'll be kind today. I'll keep it clean, obviously. One of the things I mentioned then was that most of the the rise in the price of oil is in nominal terms. Yeah. Before, when oil was trading about $85 a barrel, I finally went back and said, okay, let's just put this nonsense to bed. How much has oil actually risen in price since the oil price shocks of the 1970s in real terms? Using the CPI as the index, 13%. So for all of the bloviating about peak oil, for all the Chris Martins and doom porn and everything else that I've seen over the last 25 years about peak oil, it's all nonsense. Price of oil has only moved in real terms somewhere between 10 and 13%.
Yeah.
And that's using the CPI, which is usually very much understated. I would argue that the price of oil in real terms, inflation adjusted terms, hasn't moved other than the war premium of the last 4 months in 50 years. So there's plenty. So the market is telling you there's plenty of oil out there. There's plenty of gas. We just have to have an investment environment to allow us to go out and get it and create the certainty that we'll be able to get, to make profit off it in the future. But unfortunately, we're dealing with a bunch of German eugenicists who believe French communists are the height of intellectual prowess of human history. And this is what we're dealing with. And they've handed off the implementation of the system to a bunch of 105 IQ midwits.
Yeah, I mean it is. It is essentially a question of market distortions. Yes. This is what is creating all these problems. I mean, these problems are the direct consequence of the systemic sort of barriers that are being erected all over the place.
It's Davos's ethos, Alex. It's been their ethos since Julian Huxley and UNESCO and the Club of Rome and all that stuff, that they don't want us having access to cheap energy. They don't want us having access to efficient markets. They want to control all of those things, control what I've called in the past the wire. The wire is the thing that transmits information, right? And it doesn't matter what the wire is. It's a metaphor for everything: transportation, communications, money, everything. And they want the toll booth installed at every barrier in every place and along that entire system, so that they can extract all the profit from it, which is why they need a debt-based system to constantly extract the profit from it, so that we're all left on a profit drip feed, and we're all in effective economic serfs to their system. That is what we call capitalism today. This is why I have no patience for progressives, because this system looks all hell of a lot more like communism and technocratic rule than it does free and efficient capital markets. As opposed to looking at the evil corporations who are making all this money. I argue this stuff with leftists all the time. I'm like, as opposed to looking at them as the evil guys, because they're in bed with the government, so that's corporatism, which we both hate, right? Well, maybe you should look at human and hate humanity for it. Maybe you should look at what we've actually been able to achieve and maintain in spite of all these people, and in spite of all these barriers. That was the big awakening for me as a human being.
Yeah.
I went from a nihilistic little turd of a teenager and a young adult to the day when when I finally sat down, having read a whole bunch of, just a different perspective on the world, and went, oh my God, people are amazing that they actually survive all of these artificial and capricious barriers put in place by a whole bunch of evil people who just think that we don't deserve this stuff because they think humanity is a virus. I mean, this is like the core problem that we're facing. All the other stuff, all the little issues of the day are just manifestations of this core issue that these people fundamentally believe we don't deserve nice things, that we're a virus and we need to be controlled like livestock.
Interesting, because I've just read the title to this article in the Daily Telegraph. Energy rationing is inevitable without a fundamental rethink of net zero. A dangerous worldview is gaining ground, one that dictates we must atone for the sin of prosperity.
Yeah. No, exactly. Profit is the original sin of humanity. I've always said that property tax is the original sin of government. Right? You're taxed in perpetuity on the land you're supposed to own. It's like original sin doctrine. You already owe the government something before you even had a chance to do anything with your land. Before you actually set foot on your land, you already owe a tithe to the government. It's an original sin. You were already. I can go on and on and on. It drives me up a wall. I've been saying this stuff for privately. I've been saying it for years. I haven't said it. I haven't brought these points up for years. But this is been in my intellectual headspace since 2005. And it's shaped so much of where my research has sent me and where my life has sent me since then. And I only know the stuff that I know today if I hadn't made those insights back then, because I wouldn't have known where to look to find, to see to see how the world operates, which is why I had to go into the plumbing of the financial markets, even though that was the last thing I ever wanted to learn how to do. Ask the 25-year-old me whether I wanted to know a damn thing about euro futures curves, and be like, no, dude, I'm like trying to put together the next big magic deck. Like, what are you talking about here? Come on. So that's who I was then. It's very different. So it's a very weird world.
Talking about how weird it is, the weirdest moment for me over the last couple of days is this meeting of the G7 leaders at this German castle, and Yellen and Biden, they come along with the oil price cap idea. This is on Russian oil price cap on Russian oil. And you explain to us how oil price caps work or don't work in a moment. Wait. Yeah. So Macron says, why don't we have an oil price cap for all oil everywhere? And then Draghi, the Italian Prime Minister, says, well, why don't we extend this price cap to natural gas as well from everywhere? Apparently, this discussion actually happened. And if you look at the discussions, the statements that come out of the G7, when they talk about considering the oil price cap idea, it doesn't even make it clear anymore that it's Russian oil. It's left open
absolutely.
That it's going to be all oil everywhere. So you're going to try, these people are going to try and decide by themselves what the oil price cap is. And then there's an even more extraordinary thing, because we then read in Reuters that they've had these discussions with the Indians and the Chinese, and according to Reuters, the Indians are positive. The Chinese and Indians are positive about this thing, and they're looking on it favorably. So we're told, and then inevitably, within hours, there's this ferocious editorial in Global Times, which is the Chinese Communist Party's English language website, newspaper, whatever. So it's absolute nonsense. We never agreed to anything of the sort. We don't know what Reuters is talking about. That was basically what it said. But I mean, the whole thing is surreal. Anyway, I've lived through a world of price caps. I remember them in the 1970s. I mean, they were very, very common at that time. That was
Yep.
another time of high inflation. And the response of many Western governments at that time was price and income controls.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it never worked.
No.
What it invariably did is it created shortages.
Yes.
I
By
mean,
definition.
and more inflation.
No. Alex. So in all the classes I took in college, the one that sticks with me the most is Econ 2013, Introduction to Macroeconomics with Dave Denslow, right? And and amongst University of Florida students and alumni, Denslow is and his class is legendary because he was just this elemental force, force feeding you the law of supply and demand for 12 weeks. Brilliant class, one of the best classes I ever took, right? Because it's just basic macroeconomics, no politics, no ideology, just simple. And no matter what you do on a classic supply and demand, price versus quantity chart, if you set the price above or below the equilibrium price that the market wants, you will create shortages. Either you will create shortages because of too much demand or not enough supply. But no matter what you do, you will create shortages. Okay, price caps, price floors always create. They always create some kind of shortage in something. They create an abundance of one thing and a shortage of something else. And there's no other way of getting around that. And these people do believe that they can repeal the laws of physics. They can just write a law, stroke of the pen, law of the land, kind of cool, and repeal physics. This is why a recent article, I had to use the term the tyranny of physics, right? Like, sorry, guys, you can't, there's no getting around physics. I wish there were. Maybe there are nuances to physics that we're yet to discover that will allow us to break certain ideas and certain rules, but we ain't got there yet. And whiskey costs money and oil costs money to get out of the ground. And the idea that they can put any kind of global price control or even regional price control on the price of oil is ludicrous. It's a big world out there, and their enforcement arm isn't anywhere close to as developed as they think it is. No. These are ideas promulgated by people who literally think that if they speak magic words, that the entire world, all 7 billion of us, will listen. This is the takeaway that this is what you should take away from those statements. These people believe that they're like Marduk, invoking Jordan Peterson. He speaks magic words, and then reality is created. Yeah. And that is not the case anymore. Yeah. Remember that the collective West is a failing and falling percentage of global GDP. Not only does it only represent, these people only represent 777 million people out of 7 billion, but they also only represent, I think, 27% of global GDP now? As opposed to 47% a few years ago. Yeah. That number, especially Europe, is collapsing in terms of its percentage of global GDP. And therefore, all they can do is take their fading power and try and extend their insane regulatory state and an insane regulatory mindset onto the world. And I've been saying this for years, that the European Union was designed to become like California for the rest of the world. We here in the United States say all the time that every bad idea starts in California and then travels east. And because of California's massive political power in the United States, owning basically 12% of the House of Representatives, that they can ram through, and the massive economic power that they wield can ram through every bad idea you've ever thought of, and then impose it on the rest of the country. Well, the EU is built on that same model. And by the way, who built California? The very same people who have effectively built the European Union. Like, these are the same people over and over and over again. It's the same families. It's the same banks. It's the same oligarch classes. So it's the same over and over and over again. And you break those people by taking away their monetary spigot. You break those people by taking away ultimately their power. What's happening to California and the United States? Everyone's leaving. They're all moving to Florida, Texas, and Tennessee. They had to suppress the friggin' census here in the United States in order to not transfer an electoral vote away from California and suppress Florida, Texas, and most of the old South, should have picked up another 4 or 5 Senate seats or House seats. Easy. And they didn't, because they manipulated the friggin' census numbers as bad. And that's going to get challenged. It's going to get overturned, but it's not going to matter for the next 10 years. Well, the same thing's going on around the world. We have a global South that has refused to go along with sanctions policy. We have a global South that's saying, look, we'll pay whatever price for oil we want. Okay. Like, every time you create a price control, you create a black market that goes along with it. Every time you create a barrier, you create a black market along with it. And when the black market is operating, it's because it's operating more efficiently than the normal market. But the black market itself is a prima facie evidence of a market inefficiency that was created by arbitrary diktat. And that's where
I remember the black markets that existed in the 1970s. They were very widespread in Britain. We don't talk about them any longer. Most people can't imagine that they were happening. But I remember people doing all kinds of strange things on the side at that time. It was not that unusual, and we seem to be heading that way again. But the thing that really struck me about that discussion at that German castle of that particular plan is that the person who presented it was Janet Yellen, who is a former chair of the Fed. The person who wanted to broaden it to encompass all oil everywhere, Emmanuel Macron. I mean, he has a background in banking.
Yeah.
I don't know how real that is. But the person who wanted to extend it to gas as well was Mario Draghi, who was, of course, the chair of the European Central Bank.
Exactly.
I mean, it is really very strange to see, this bunch of bankers coming up with this extraordinary thing. I mean, price fixing, extraordinary. Now, coming back to what the Fed is going to do, is it going to stick with its policy of raising interest rates? Because I agree, there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure from all sorts of people. Already you can hear rumblings in Europe from various people talking about this. But I mean, will they stick with it? Will they see it through?
Oh, I can tell you that I am in the vast minority on this one, vanishingly small minority, who understands, I believe understands what's going on. And I've been getting some confirmation from powerful people like Danielle DiMartino Booth, who's between the lines saying the same thing, while all the normies within there's like normies are everywhere. There's normal financial discussions that go on like Sky News and Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal and all the rest. And then you have what I like to call normie alt finance. Those would be your kind of first generation Austrian guys, right? This is and this is like the Peter Schiffs and the Mike Shedlocks and those guys and most of the zero hedge set, right? Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I have a lot of respect for those guys, but invariably they make the fundamental and catastrophic mistake of only seeing things in domestic terms. That the Fed can't do X because of this domestic thing or this domestic thing or that domestic thing, right? When the reality is that the Fed has been, up until last year, the central bank of the world since Bernanke turned it into that post Lehman Brothers in 2008, 2009. And we've had the era of coordinated central bank policy, which has been the monetary system since 2009. The dollar reserve standard ended in 2008. It was over. It peaked in 2008. It's been on decline ever since. Okay. And the only way the dollar reserve standard that we think we are living under was been able to be extended was for the central banks to all coordinate policy. All right. So they coordinated who gets to do QE when. And they would do round robin QE. So first it was the Bank of Japan, then it was the Bank of England. Then when they're done, then it was the ECB. And then the SNB did their thing and bought a whole bunch of equities because they're the biggest equity hedge fund in the world. And then it would go to the Fed. And then. So that system is gone. Jerome Powell has made it abundantly clear that system is gone. He has put the tools in place to declare the Fed's independence. Why was he not able to do this during COVID? Well, because he had a president, even Trump, who didn't want to not print money and not allow Congress to print trillions of dollars, which he had to monetize because there was no foreign market for it. And so many people in this space, I hate to name names, but the Catherine Austin Fitz and all of these people, because I saw her name earlier in one of the questions. Like, I watched even Luke Gromen, who's an amazing macro analyst, misses the bigger point that Powell didn't go along willingly in March of 2020. He went along very reluctantly. In fact, you could make a very credible argument that all of COVID was put on us in order to stop the Fed from declaring independence from the central bank cartel. Because they already had, when he raised interest rates aggressively in 2018, and the US banks all stopped repoing European debt as collateral, which broke the financial system. And now with the full implementation of SOFR, the Secured Overnight Funding Rate, and the end of USD LIBOR, American banks are insulated completely, and American mortgages are insulated completely from whatever happens in Europe. And therefore, Powell can do whatever the hell he wants. Moreover, and this is a statistic even I've fallen for, and this is a point that like guys like Luke Gromen have made, and I like made them like Wolf Street the other day wrote an article, and I haven't had a chance to follow up on it publicly. I have privately. That there's the canard that if we raise interest rates by 1 point, that's going to add $300 billion to the federal budget in debt servicing. That is not true. It's going to add some money. But right now, the U.S. government has financed all of this debt at historically low interest rates. Debt servicing as a function of U.S. GDP is at an all-time low. It's like 2.2%. It's nothing. There's plenty of room for the Fed to raise rates. It's all new debt will have to be indexed to the higher rates, but not and sold at the higher rates, but not new debt, not old debt. Old debt was all sold at, the coupon payments don't change, guys. So that's never going to be retired early. It's never going to be, the Fed is just going to let it roll off. It's any of the higher interest rate debt. What they might do is, one, allow that to run off their balance sheet, but they'll also pay that. They may even pay that off if, God forbid, there was a budget surplus. A la what Greenspan did in the early days of his reign after Volcker. Like in 1987, 1988, by all that 13, 14, 15% debt that we sold during the height of Volcker's reign, the 81 through 83, that all got paid off by Greenspan. By the end of they all got paid their coupons back. We stopped paying 13% on our debt. We just paid the coupons back. Or just paid the bonds back and stopped paying the coupons. And then reissued them as 3% bonds. Okay? The Fed has an immense amount of room to raise here. And they're doing so, I think, to break the ECB. And I think if you watch the body language of that ECB summit from earlier in the week between Lagarde and Powell, you will see that they are not in cahoots. They don't like each other. But they can't have a summit of central bankers and not invite the Fed chair. Yeah. Okay. So, and Lagarde came out and basically told the world, we're screwed and we don't have any answers. And Powell was like, we're going to raise rates. And the market is trying to blackmail him with these, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, the outset of the show, that the market with this move, they're trying to blackmail Powell into only raising by 25 basis points or 50 basis points. I'm telling you, it's going to be 75.
What happens in Europe when this happens? What do the Europeans do? What is the ECB going to do?
Sovereign debt crisis. Because I mean, and the main reason is following is something I read the other day that finally like chinked to put things in place, which is that most of the debt in the United States is corporate debt, right? A lot of the high index debt is corporate debt, and the corporate debt's all sold at like unbelievably low. I mean, if you've seen the yields on Apple debt, it's ridiculous. So they're selling billions of bonds at a point and a half. Like same thing with a lot of these major companies. In Europe, it's all bank debt. It's all direct bank loans. So the banks have direct exposure to a seizure of the debt markets, the credit markets, and the money markets. And as the Fed keeps pulling dollar liquidity out from the world, as I keep saying, watch the euro dollar futures market, watch the euro, watch the bond spreads between U.S. and European debt, not inter-European debt. That's just telling you what the ECB is going to do. Watch it between U.S. and German debt. Watch global safe haven versus European safe haven debt spreads, and that'll tell you whether or not, Houston, we have a problem, or Berlin, we have a problem. So that, to me, I don't see how we get around a sovereign debt crisis. The only question now I have is Davos leaning into that? Because that's what they want anyway, because they need to default on the debt in order to be able to issue perpetual debt, roll all the wealth up and all the power up to the ECB, liquidate the national central banks, nationalize all the gold and everything else. That's it's a great argument. And, the conspiracy, minded that, in that corner of the commentariat will all say, oh, see, it's all part of the plan. Well, no, it's part of their plan, but it's not on their time schedule. It's not when they wanted. Their central bank digital currency isn't ready yet. Their digital euro isn't ready yet. None of this stuff is ready yet. I mean, just because their planned future comes to pass doesn't mean that everybody, that Jay Powell was working for them. Just like they wanted a war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine doesn't mean Putin works for them. They chose the war. He chose the time. They chose the default. Powell chose the time. Who wins if the timing is wrong? This is the first rule of trading. You can get the fundamentals right and get the timing wrong and still lose all your money. And that's what I think is happening. And I'm going to name names. That's what I think is happening to people like James Corbett, Ryan Christian, Whitney Webb, and others that are not seeing the bigger picture. They see the individual grains in the noise, and then they just immediately apply it to a particular mindset and a particular set of confirmation biases, as opposed to remaining open-minded and constantly asking the real question that only matters. The only question that ever matters: cui bono? Who benefits right now? And then you can go right now in this context with this thing. That's what the difference between, frankly, good geopolitical analyst and a good data acquirer. Right? Some people are really good at acquiring data. Some people are good at synthesizing data. That's the difference. You guys are really good at synthesizing data. That's why I'm on the show. That's why I love you guys.
We love you, and we love you, Tom.
Yeah, and I mean that sincerely. I don't give that. I don't give that compliment out.
No.
I give that compliment out.
Nor do we.
Yeah.
Nor do we.
Very rarely.
Very rarely. Can I just say, Tom, my own impression in Europe, and certainly in Britain, is that the people, the Davos type people, are not happy at the moment at all. They don't feel things are going according to plan. They are, on the contrary, they're starting to get, not just starting, they're beginning to get butterflies in their stomach, that sinking feeling. That's generally what the mood is. And I mean, you see sort of manipulations and people talking about, what we must do. But I also get the sense that at some level, they feel they're losing control of some of their own puppets, actually. Yeah. I mean, my own impression about Robert Habeck, who is the German economics minister, is that, the Green Party, in my opinion, is entirely, essentially, I mean, you've been saying this for years now, it's essentially a Davos outfit. I think the trouble with Habeck is that he's actually somebody who's come to believe in a lot of the things that he's saying, which is, given the kind of things he's been saying,
he's not a cynic.
He's not a cynic, exactly. No. And I think it's becoming increasingly dangerous. He also has a very strange, I find a lot of the way he speaks, frankly, extremely shrill and unbalanced also. But I mean, it's going to be very difficult to, rein in and control this person. And not just him, there are lots of people like him. So I think we will get a crisis in Europe. What will the shape of that be? What is going to happen? When are we going to I don't mean, how is it going to conclude, but what is the thing to look out for? God. You talked about, German and US bond yields.
Alex, a good catalyst for this. I mean, I already think we've already gotten it. I think the ECB has already capitulated. You and I talked when we were on Crypto Rich's show a couple of weeks ago, and you mentioned the emergency meeting the day the Fed raised 75 basis points as the big thing that everybody went, oh my God, they don't have any answers. But yet, notice how the markets have all traded the way Lagarde has wanted them to trade for the rest of the quarter.
Yeah.
So they still have a lot of control. They're spending, but what I see is that's them spending money.
Yeah.
It's like George Soros having to spend money to manipulate elections in the United States. He's already that he can't win.
Yeah.
Right. Just in the vain hope that he could keep the Democrats from losing 90 seats in the House, and they're only going to lose 70. I guess that will be that'll justify the pizza party after the elections, or I don't know. So I don't know in specific, because I'll be honest with you, the catalysts never look like what you think they're going to look like.
No.
What I can tell you is, and this is why I try to stay away from some of this stuff and just say, look, it's coming. It's here. It's on the horizon, right? I mean, I even do this when I read Martin Armstrong, and he publishes his arrays and his opinions on what he thinks Socrates is telling him, his cycles, work that he does, and I go, okay, that's Martin's interpretation of what he thinks Socrates is telling him. It doesn't mean that Socrates, if he gets it wrong, it doesn't mean Socrates was wrong. It just means that Martin didn't, he's got his biases, and as an analyst, he, blew a call so I use that, I use some of those things to try and help refine the timing and go, hey, in this time frame, something like this is going to happen. For example, Socrates is screaming that there's going to be an escalation in August. Well, guess what? Have you heard anything else other than escalation in August out of the Brits, out of the Americans, out of Europe? No, of course you haven't. They have something planned.
Yeah.
Right. And why do they have something planned? Because the U.S. midterms are coming, and they have to do something to save Biden, and abortion hasn't worked, and gun control hasn't worked, and this issue hasn't worked, and that issue hasn't worked.
Yeah.
The issue here is that there's so many plates spinning. There's so many things happening that better to just leave yourself open to receive the information that's coming, and let your brain work on it all, and then go, there it is.
Yeah.
And for me, it was the waking up or not going to sleep the night before and seeing that meeting from the ECB. Or as I've said many times, the day that my wife read off to me the headline off the Drudge Report, which said, British Parliament votes against David Cameron to go invade Syria. And I went, excuse me? What just happened? And literally my life changed. I became I now became obsessed with geopolitics at that point. Because all of a sudden, for years, politics and the world was just running on autopilot in my mind. And then that moment, we had a state change. We moved 90 degrees off of where we were. And now the world was interesting.
Yeah.
So
So
I don't have a good answer to that.
You
question.
don't have a good
I'd love
answer.
to give you one, but I think it's very important that you've seen. What I'm trying to do is give you all the players. And I think Hayback is a very interesting individual to watch. I think Boris Johnson's premiership is an interesting thing to watch. I think all of these things are an interesting thing to watch. I think Bulgaria's losing their parliamentary majority. Was it Latvia?
Yeah.
A few weeks ago. What happens if Lithuania? What happens? I don't know if there's a revolt in Lithuania and Vilnius because they don't want to get nuked by the Russians, or invaded. Like I don't know. I mean, and at some point, everybody has to take a step back and go, "Hey, these people are crazy," but everything is falling into place. And this is my point earlier about if you think the multifamily office guys aren't looking at, and the 2 and 20 carried interest set aren't looking at this situation going and aren't horrified and trying to figure out what to do with their money, then you're not seeing the fact that the foundation, that the system still looks like it's functioning and that these people all still have power, but the foundation has crumbled. And it'll take one little thing for the whole thing to collapse. And in Europe, that could be anything.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I think a crisis in Lithuania and, a potential military crisis, which, we're not there, but, we're not it's not impossible to imagine. I mean, that would certainly create massive problems. Now, we had a question, I think, on Rumble about this, because I think somebody I asked us whether, this is Lithuania trying to do. I think I've got this right, Alex. I haven't got the question in front of me. But,
Is it possible that Lithuania is trying to pressure the EU to end the sanctions on Russian gas before winter? Put pressure on EU sanctions with trade blockade might let Baltics not freeze. That's from Andres. The EU, by the way,
that's a really good like 4D chess kind of question.
I've read in German media actually, just like about a couple of hours ago, that they're getting the news that the EU is winning in this war with Lithuania. That the EU is saying, we are going to create a carve out in these sanctions so that Russia can move goods to Kaliningrad. And this is according to the German media. And this is coming directly from Germany. Germany is the one that's putting its foot down and saying, we're not going to go there by blocking off Kaliningrad. Once again, this is from the German media, so I don't.
Well, the German media usually that's usually a good sign as to where the German state is. And the other thing I would say is that the Russians made it abundantly clear because they moved nuclear and non-nuclear tipped Iskanders into Kaliningrad. They made it abundantly clear that if you blockade Kaliningrad, we'll just nuke Berlin.
I think it was actually from Spiegel, to be more precise as well. So,
if it came from Spiegel, then it's absolutely coming from the German government. It also tell you. Then the big question is whether Habeck walks all that back. Because if Habeck walks all that back, then he's got the German Greens in the upper house saying no. So it's going to be interesting to see if Scholz and Habeck are, on board with this or not. Because Habeck is absolutely committed to destroying German industry.
Yeah. This is the point I was making before. This is what I think he really wants. I think he's, to a great extent, used this crisis. I didn't think this so at the beginning, but I've come to exactly that conclusion. He is using this crisis in order to carry through this program, this green program, which is, of course, ultimately deindustrialization. Yes. I don't think people in Germany have understood that at all. By the way, going back to that question, I think my own personal view is that I don't think Baltic politicians are as sophisticated as that question implies. I don't think they've done this thing with Kaliningrad in order to, get some kind of shift on gas policy. One would like to think that they are clever enough to think like that, but I just don't think they do, to be straightforward about it. I think that they were put up to do it by
the British,
all the usual people, the British, who have great influence in Vilnius. Some people in Washington also, I suspect.
Sure.
And they didn't consult widely enough in Europe. And now I think they're getting very upset that they don't find that they have the support in Europe that they expected. And that may actually have political implications. It may have political consequences in Lithuania and the Baltic states, because it's the first time I can remember where the Baltic states have taken an extreme anti-Russian position and have found that the rest of the EU has come out and said no.
Yeah,
and that may be something that
that's a really great point, Alex. I think this, and this is and to the credit of the person who asked the question, it opened up a lot of very interesting ideas. I think that from the beginning, when I saw this, the first thing I said was, "Oh, the Russians aren't going to take the bait here. This is just the Brits trying to provoke the Russians into going on tilt and doing something dumb." And the Russians said, "Well, no, we're going to do what we're going to do," because I'm sure that they understood that there was no cohesion within Europe to actually enforce this blockade. And if there is, well, then we'll just do what we need to do, which is we'll just continue to arm Kaliningrad in order to be able to force project in a necessary manner with nuclear. And my partner Dexter White doesn't believe that the nuclear brinksmanship is a strategy anymore. He thinks that that's the biggest breakdown of the world order with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's his criticism of Putin. And I don't happen to agree with him on this, but I'm willing to always listen to his interpretation, because he's always thinking, as far ahead as I think, sometimes he goes even farther. Okay. And then doesn't, and then there's a lot going on in that guy's head. And I trust his spidey sense sometimes, even though I may not agree with him, because because it may be an idea built on, you know, a lack of real nuanced understanding of what's really happening, like German politics, for example. I happen to agree with that statement, but I think it's something we have to bracket for, right? And here's a perfect example of how we can say, oh, look, the Russians moved nuclear-tipped Iskanders into Kaliningrad in order to make it abundantly clear to the decision makers within the European Union and the decision-making centers and within the European Union that you will pay the ultimate price if you decide to try and starve our people. This is a consistent policy, and our consistent policy with what we're doing in Donbass.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you like it or not. It doesn't matter if you agree with it. It doesn't matter if you think it's legal under international law. It doesn't matter. Yet, not happening.
Exactly.
Like that's where we are. And it's unfortunate that we're in this place. To Dexter White's point, to the breakdown of international law and nuclear brinksmanship, yada, yada, yada. Where it's unfortunate that we're in this place. But ask yourself the question, who brought us here?
Yes. Well, indeed, exactly. I mean, that is the key point. I mean, the business about these Iskanders being moved to Belarus as well. I mean, it was very, very interesting discussion between Putin and Lukashenko, because, of course, Putin actually went out of his way to say that those Iskanders can be tipped with nuclear weapons. Now, he's not going to give Lukashenko nuclear weapons. What he's basically saying is that those Iskanders in Belarus are under Russian control. And he's also saying that Russia is preparing for a crisis over Kaliningrad, because that's what that is all about. Now, it is in a kind of sense nuclear brinkmanship, but never forget that Kaliningrad is Russian territory.
Yes.
And the Russians have to protect it. I mean, this isn't for them something that they can retreat from.
Right.
And if people start, imposing blockades, then the Russians will take military, real blockades if they try to interfere with shipping and, try to
guys, Alex, get out of London, because the Russians are serious about where the the decisions are coming from. They know they're coming from 10 Downing Street and from MI6.
Well, they will quite, yeah. But I mean, and by the way, on the point about coded warnings, I mean, which is a rather more coded warning. Again, I mean, these are often things that people don't grasp. But Putin, went to that exhibition, Peter the Great, and he talked about how Peter the Great had fought this war with Sweden and, regained territory, which was Slav territory. Now, you could question the history. But he wasn't saying, I'm the new Peter the Great. What he was actually doing is he was warning the Swedes. He was saying, look, if you want to get into NATO, well, that's your business. We're not going to do anything about it. But if you're going to use your future membership of NATO, which, by the way, Erdogan has again.
Right. Yeah. No. Alex, I watched Alex C's video from Greece this morning, actually, about that. It was hilarious, by the way. It was excellent.
It is. I mean, it is. I mean, Erdogan. Well, I agree with that, actually. By the way, I've also watched it. I too thought it was hilarious. But can I just say, I mean, but putting that aside, what Putin is saying to the Swedes is, look, don't push your luck. That was what that was all about. And in Sweden, they understand this. They may not understand this in the New York Times or in the Guardian or the London Times, but that is what Putin was actually saying. And since we are, in fact, bringing up Putin, I mean, let's just switch a bit to looking at what's happening over there, because on the other side of the fence, because there was some really interesting discussions going on in Russia at the moment. Firstly, I mean, they have ruled out any administrative measures, as they say, to balance the economy. They've allowed everything to be decided by supply and demand. They've not rationed. They've not imposed price controls.
Yep.
They've actually explicitly ruled out doing any of those things, which is really very, very interesting indeed. There is, by the way, and I'd just like you to comment about this, there is a public row going on at this moment in time between the central bank, Nabulina, who wants to keep interest rates. She's a bit nervous about reducing interest rates.
Of course she is. She always is.
She always is. So she says, that she doesn't believe in the fact that inflation is falling as fast as it appears to be falling, and she's going to keep interest rates propped up. So that's interest rates. She's going to reduce. She's going to be gradual. She's going to be slow.
Yeah.
And you have the economics ministry led by a man called Reshetnikov, who says, for heaven's sake, you can afford to cut interest rates more.
Yes.
You can do it a lot more. In fact, we are actually now in a position where we're probably going to get deflation in June.
Yeah.
So you've got much more room to cut interest rates than you're saying. And then again, it's the same two groups. One group is saying that the strong ruble is a good thing. We might as well let it run its course. The other says strong ruble is a bad thing because it's making our exports uncompetitive. I think that was, whether that was true or not in the past. I've come to the view myself that this is an out of date view, given the fact that it makes no sense.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
But it's been interesting to see this debate play out.
Yeah, there's been great. By the way, there's been great work done by a number of Austrian economists to explain the import-export, strong currency, weak currency argument. It's been done. I can't quote chapter and verse. I think Bob Murphy's written about this. A variety of others. They've all gone through and just debunked most of that Keynesian mercantilist nonsense. That it's mostly a beggar thy neighbor artifact of these stupid debt-based currencies. And look, like everything else, if your currency is strong, then you bring in a whole bunch of goods from around the world at a cheap price, which you then create second order and third order goods from, which have a higher profit margin, which you then export back to the world. You don't care. Doesn't matter. Nabiulina is IMF trained. Nabiulina is, as far as I'm concerned, a fifth columnist. I've never changed my opinion about Nabiulina ever. I think she gets to look like the world's best central banker in the eyes of, the alt commentariat, whatever you want to call us, because the rest of the central bankers are so bad. But that doesn't make her good. She destroyed the Russian recovery post-ruble crisis of 2015. She had to be publicly dressed down by Putin and visited by Putin to lower interest rates by half a point in the middle of 2015 or 2016, May of 2016, to finally to get her to stop holding. She was trying to hold rates high to destroy the Russian economy. She needs to go. She needs to be fired. She needed to be fired 5 years ago. I don't know why she's still in power. Russia's biggest problem now is they're making so much money. They don't have the productive. They don't have the infrastructure, the people, the labor to spend the money that they're making. So you could make the argument that they could keep interest rates high because they don't really want to overstimulate an economy that's already seeing so much money come in. And the attenuation of the ruble will mitigate the flow of real rubles into the Russian economy, right? The rubles come down from 80 to 55 or 53 or whatever it is. It's a big drop. That means that when they sell oil and gas for dollars, euros, yen, pounds, whatever, that's getting translated into the Russian economy as fewer rubles. Remember when the Russian economy was weak? Because I always argued when the Russian economy was weak, and when the ruble was weak, we didn't care. When we put sanctions on the ruble to artificially depress it, right? The Russians are going, well, that's great. We're still going to pay our people in rubles. So you're giving me $85 a barrel oil. I'm trading it at 80 rubles to the dollar. This is making it really easy for Gazprom to record record profits and and pay their guys more and yada yada yada. And like they don't know what to do with the money. Oh, hey, let's build another pipeline. Let's build another, let's build out our electricity generation vertical. Let's do this. Let's do that. Right. Well, on the flip side, bringing the price of the ruble back in line as to where it actually should be, which in my mind should easily be in the low 50s, high 40s, which is probably about where it's going to settle. If you've noticed, it's starting to run into some resistance in the low 50s. Great, perfect. Let the exchange rate attend to itself. Take off the capital controls, which they already have, but signal to the markets. Remember, raising interest rates and falling interest rates don't tell you what the Keynesians tell you. They are a signal to the market of the confidence that the people have in the system. Rising interest rates are falling confidence. Falling interest rates are rising confidence. So if you keep your interest rate high, you're telling everybody you don't have any confidence in your economy, you don't have any confidence in your currency. So the Russians need right now to start inviting foreign capital in. That's why I found nearly $1 trillion worth of deals at SPIEF to be a very important thing, because they have a lot of infrastructure they need to build out to finish off to finish off their part of basically Belt and Road and complete the divorce that's being imposed upon them by Europe and the West. So there's pipelines that need to be built. There's infrastructure that needs to be there's regasification stations and all sorts of stuff that need to be built in Siberia to get the ESPO pipeline up from 800,000 barrels a day to its 1.6 million capacity to serve South Korea, Beijing, and Tokyo. Right? They need to. As a matter of fact, ESPO needs to be 3 million barrels a day. Okay. Otherwise, they're going to run into a bottleneck in a couple of years, and the neocons are like Peter Zeihan and the rest of them are going to go, see, we won, because the Russians are going to have to shutter a couple of 800,000 barrels a day worth of oil production because it's not going to Rotterdam anymore, or they're going to have to build a whole bunch of new ships in order to move the oil around the world. The point being is that the Russians at this point have a real need for loosened infrastructure capital. And is 8.5% the right interest rate? I don't know, but that's the fundamental fallacy of central banking. None of us know. Napolina doesn't know. Powell doesn't know. No one knows. That should be left to the market. So ultimately, but I think that there's room in the Russian economy for her to cut to 6.5%, 6%, and it would be no problem. 8.5% is in this situation is injurious. It's being done on purpose. It's being done on purpose. Like I said, by an IMF trained fifth columnist. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure she's going to cut more. I think this is inevitable. I mean, she is
political.
The political crisis. I think the demand is enormous. I'm also going to say something else, which is, I mean, whatever the economics about the strong ruble, and of course, economics and human psychology are never to be separated anyway. But I can say for a fact from people I know that during this particular period of time, this particular moment of crisis that came after, the first sanctions were imposed, the fact that the ruble, after, its wobble started to strengthen and has continued to strengthen, has had a massive psychological effect within the country. It is telling people hyperinflation isn't going to happen.
That's right.
The financial system is working normally. So by all means, go to your shops, buy your things, keep your money in your bank. Don't convert it into whatever you think you can convert it. It has played a huge role in stabilizing the situation inside.
And if she were to lower the cost of capital by 2%, there would be an economic boom. The Russians would have to start. The Russians are already now going to need to radically import foreign labor. They have so much to be built. And if they want to be a regional, and if they want to be a real regional reserve power player, they're going to need to do this because they don't have the population to support the ambitions that and the burden that that global capital is going to place on them by their own political, military ambitions in Europe. They were acting as the tip of the spear to break the West, to break the 1,000-year dominance of the West. They're acting as the vanguard to this. Everybody is looking to them. You can't on a population of 145 million people. Okay, maybe they've added 7 million in the Donbass, or they're about to 150 million people. It's nothing. They are going to have to allow that leadership position to increase, and they're only going to do that by allowing for the massive build out of the Russian infrastructure to tie it to all of those trade partners, that they're building all this infrastructure, the BRICS currency, all of this stuff, the alliance, all of this stuff. Now comes the time when the roads have got to get built, and the pipelines have got to get built, and the railways have got to get built, and the train stations, and the regasification stations, the electrical grid, and all of that, and paved roads outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg. Like that is what needs to happen. And they've got the money for it, so now do it.
Oh, absolutely. They've got the money for it, and of course, the strong ruble is an attraction because, of course, if you are a guest worker from Tajikistan, you go to Russia now, and you get paid very well. I mean,
you get paid very well to go lay pipe or be a welder or
Well, I've seen it done. I've seen road. I'm sure Alex has seen it also. I mean, vast teams of people from Central Asia coming in and building roads at a speed, by the way, which in Britain we can't possibly even conceive of,
contemplate,
or even contemplate. Exactly. I mean, this is definitely happening. But anyway, it is very interesting to see these discussions taking place in Moscow at the moment, between, as I said, different agencies.
Yeah, these are good problems to have.
Absolutely, yeah, quite. These are good problems to have. But as I said, it's interesting to see these discussions, and they are discussions about the real world. I mean, they are actually looking at the problems that they have, and actually trying to find solutions for them, and having a genuine debate. Whereas, Alex yesterday said, I think it was one of the programs that we did, that, in the G7, they just get together in a little bubble and they all end up agreeing with the one who takes the most extreme position, because that's what they do. And it has no real connection to what goes on in the world. Yeah.
That's so true. So I'm listening to you, Alex. I'm trying to read the comments as they come in, because the comments are fascinating. So Gabriel McMillan for $5. Putin should take the inflows and invest in the EU, China, India, developing these nations and becoming an owner of their capital. In many ways, that's exactly what I'm saying. Notice what they've been doing, Gabriel. $25 billion into Iran and Iraq, and now Gazprom is building. How much is Rosatom building? Nuclear power plants all over Central Asia. Gazprom's electricity. One of the things I noted about Gazprom about 3 years ago, and I told my subscribers in the newsletter about, is that the fastest growing vertical within Gazprom is not oil, it's not gas, it's electricity generation.
Yeah,
they're building pipelines and then dropping power stations along the pipelines. And I said then, during the Trump dalliance with North Korea, and we could all see it coming, I said, you see what's going to happen here when Trump met with Kim and all that they're going to bring a pipeline down through North Korea, drop power stations and start electrifying North Korea, and bring the pipeline to the South Korean border, coming straight down through Korea and done. And once that's done, like Gazprom now owns, this is the ultimate win-win. You've got a gas pipeline carrying Russian gas with a BOT build own transfer designed power station that the Koreans will eventually own to build out their electrical grid. And then you also tie Russia to South Korea directly. And wonder why John Bolton put the kibosh on that. It clear as day to me, but I could see it coming. And the pipeline, I've said this before, pipelines are the things that stitch together the world. Yes. They're the things that should stitch together the world. At the same time, they are also a double-edged sword, because they're also very easy infrastructure to bomb during times of war.
Absolutely.
Which is why shipping is going to be a very interesting thing going forward. But the comments, by the way, I feel bad that we haven't actually addressed many of the comments that have come by the board.
Yeah. Maybe we could cover some of them, actually,
sure,
Alex, because you've got them there. So perhaps if we could go through some of the comments that have been made, because I thought they were very interesting too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, they always are on our live streams.
Yeah, and I'll try and keep the answers brief.
It's interesting what you said, Tom, as I go through the comments and look for them, that you say that pipelines are what stitches the world together. I agree with you. Isn't it interesting that the Russians have not destroyed the pipelines in Ukraine? What does that tell you?
Of course.
about this operation.
Yeah, no, it's also why I think that everybody's been asking me for years, well, why does the Russians just show up the gas to Europe? I'm like, because they're not targeting the civilian population, they're targeting the governments.
Yeah.
The war is designed to create a war of attrition against the politicians who invited the war in the first place. The strategy is and the mindset is quite easy to understand and has been very consistent.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
As far as I'm concerned, I think they've played this brilliantly. I mean, I've been operational hiccups here and there, but dude, this is what I would have done. This is how I would have fought Europe.
Yeah.
But I'm more of a hothead than Putin, so I probably would have already nuked somebody. But so it's a good thing that I'm not in charge of the Kremlin. But simply because I'm Italian and I'm like, no, I'm sorry, the hell with the Germans. We're just done with these people. So. Go ahead. Let's answer some questions.
Maybe one day you'll take over in Italy.
No.
Take
you guys
over
really
for
don't want me in charge. I used to do that fantasy all the time on my periscopes years ago, saying on an inauguration day, I would have the big jumbotron behind me with the drone footage of us of the Russian Spetsnaz that I asked Putin to go in and we're gonna show you the live stream of the Russian Spetsnaz wiping out the CIA guys in the poppy fields in Afghanistan. That was my rant from 2016. This would have been my inauguration day. I'm like, you guys don't want me as president. I'd have the jumbotron going, and I'd have the whole thing on pay-per-view afterwards to balance the budget. So, all right, let's do some questions. Come on,
let's do some questions. Ashma Magola says neutrality for Switzerland. For that, Ashma Magola, and let's see here. Summer 1970. Thank you for that super sticker. William says Pepe Escobar next time. Thank you for that. Angry Warhawk says thanks for mentioning my channel last time.
Absolutely. Can
Angry
I just
Warhawk.
say
I forgot.
we're Angry War. We were all going to mention it because
Angry
it's a great
Warhawk.
channel.
Angry Warhawk. That is the channel. Let's see. Budweiser. Thank you for that super sticker. Let me see. Did we answer this from Sanjeva? The U.S. Energy Secretary said today that she doesn't care about the high gas prices and inflation, as saving the liberal world order is more important. They live in some ideological fantasy land and not the real world. Actually, we did
answer it, but I mean,
it's
I still have to say, if you talk about the war of illusions, well, there you go. I mean, somebody who lives in an ideological world of illusions against the realities of the world today. I mean,
the Biden administration
doesn't matter whether you
that need to be removed from office bodily.
Absolutely.
I mean, when Colonel McGregor is actually calling now, he did this on Judge Knapp's show the other day. He said, "No, Biden, we need to literally remove these people from office and put them all in jail."
Yeah.
That's how bad. We're getting to that point when ex-military guys, when ex-full-bird colonels are saying shit like this. Guys, this is sincere, and I don't disagree with them, but that's not going to happen until after the midterms. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, agreed. David S., thank you for that super sticker. Commander Crossfire says, quote, I cannot forecast to you the action of Russia. It is a riddle wrapped inside a mystery, inside an enigma.
This is from Winston Churchill, but he went on to answer that question. And this is the point about what Churchill said that is always forgotten. He said, but there may be a clue towards answering this riddle wrapped in an enigma, mapped in what it, which is Russian national interests.
Yes.
Always said that. People always forget that. But he said, if you follow what Russian national interests are, and you might begin to see your way through. And by the way, the context in which he said that was in 1939, shortly after the Soviet German pact. And people were saying means that those two powers will be allies forever. Churchill said Russia will always follow its national interests in the end, even when you have an ideological setup as they did then.
Yep.
Sammy says, fantastic analysis from the Duran and various guests. Thank you for that. Two Boomers says the Duran #1 in world analysis. Thank you for that. Two Boomers. Joseph, thank you for that super sticker. Chun Ling, thank you for that super sticker. Black Tie, thank you for that super sticker. Nicholas, we answered this one. World oil reserves, 47 years at 97 million barrels per day.
I didn't quite make my point. Ultimately, we need to get control of these people as quickly as possible in order to get the oil and gas sector investable in a predictable manner. There's plenty of oil out there.
Right.
But the question is going to be whether or not Davos can destroy our ability to coordinate production in time with what's coming. And the next couple of years are going to be very difficult. And so oil reserves are going to fall because we have a problem coming. But it's not an insolvable problem.
No.
Because we know where most of the oil is. But go ahead.
Huawei fan says, where is Poland agitator, president, or the prime minister? Poland has been a little quiet the past couple of weeks, to be honest.
Well, the Russian intelligence chief, a man called Narishkin, has just done another report in which he said that Poland had cooled for a time on the take Galicia proposal, but now they're thinking more seriously about it again. And they're doing so because of the situation in Ukraine, but also because they're starting to look at the situation in Europe. And they sense that, the mood there is shifting, and they think that this Europe isn't in it for the long term. So I'm probably summarizing it badly, but certainly the Russians are keeping a very close eye on Poland. By the way,
I will not be surprised if the Poles extract a portion of Ukraine as their pound of flesh for being invaded by Ukrainian refugees.
Yeah. I would say we did a brilliant show with a Polish journalist a short time ago, and I have some connections with Poland historically, and my own sense is that an awful lot of people in Poland would not be happy about Poland getting itself mixed up in Western Ukraine. That I've been sort of doing some tests on Polish opinion here. Obviously, there's some people with very fervid views, but I'm guessing actually they're probably the minority.
My biggest problem with Poland is that Davos has done a wonderful job of shoring up the entire the political system. So if Law and Justice gets thrown out of power for making a misstep, who effectively Davos, center right Davos, it's the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing. You've got Donald Tusk standing right behind them.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that so to me, Poland is a lost cause. And I'm only interested now in everything, I'm only interested in Eastern Europe, south of Poland, about as I start to handicap what happens to the European Union in terms of it being able to break up. Next question.
Jennifer Chang says, coffee's for you. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for that. Also, super chat. David Bauer says, rejoinder to Obama, USA, an empty warehouse masquerading as an empire.
I think that's too. I think that's
way too strong.
Yeah.
We don't want to underestimate the ability of the United States to do something dumb the one thing we don't want to do. Putin's been very careful about this. The one thing you don't ever want to do is get the Americans angry at you. And I'm not talking about the American government. I'm talking about the American people. American people are angry and frustrated and pissed off and everything else. And the best thing to do right now is to keep them focused on their government, not overseas. Because we saw what happened when they get angry with overseas 20 years ago after 9/11. Okay. Yeah. So there's still plenty of capacity there. It's been degraded, but never underestimate the ability of the United States to shift gears quickly into a war mentality.
Yeah.
That will scare the piss out of the world. And I'm not saying that with any sense of bravura or bravado. No. I'm actually horrified by the potential. So as far as I'm concerned, let's just keep the anti-American rhetoric to a minimum, because the goal here is to get the Americans to capitulate on Ukraine without going to war. The goal here is to make everybody look like it's the Americans who are the bad guys, when it's Europe that's the one that's been pushing all of this crap.
Right. Well,
and using us as the bad guys and then blaming us for it.
Yeah. Right. Well, Tom, that actually segues a lot into a point which I was just about to make. Go to Putin's statements over the last few weeks, not the ones that he made immediately after the sanctions were imposed, when he was furiously angry, and you could see that he was very angry, and he said some things. But the latest comments that he's made over the last couple of weeks. Now, when he talks about the Europeans, he oozes contempt for them.
Yes.
He absolutely can't stand them.
Yes.
and all of them collectively. About the US, he's much more measured. His comments about the US are very measured indeed. There is
Yes, they are.
there is a real distinction.
Mhm.
He still retains. I think this isn't just true of him, but of the Russians in general. They still see the US as a real adversary, obviously, but as a real power. Whereas Europe they see as a complete lost cause.
There's another point to this, which is to think farther down the line.
No.
And I know that Putin's thinking in these terms, which is that Russia cannot become the gas station for China.
No.
I've said many times in the past that if you look at the way Davos has been setting the game board up, they've been setting the game board up to destroy the US and get and leave Russia isolated by not having an antipode to China. If Davos loses and all of this stuff, their goal here is to ensure that if they don't win, no one wins. Because Russia, in order to not be subsumed by China 20 years from now, 30 years from now, after all the capital moves east and the Russians and their demographic issues and all of the other issues that they have to work out, and there's a lot that they have to work out.
Yeah.
The last thing, if Putin's going to set Russia up on a stability path for another 100 years, he's got to solve the balancing act between the world powers. And that means you do not cheer the destruction of the United States. You leave the U.S. as an antipode to China as a balancing act, because as Europe sinks into depravity.
Yeah.
That's the way I see the Russians carving their policy.
Yeah.
Okay? And because longer term, if they don't think in those terms, the Chinese will subsume them.
Yeah.
They'll lose the entire eastern portion of the country. I mean, it's going to be real. The Chinese are good now. They will turn expansionist eventually. We have historical precedent on this. So I want, and I know that the Russians have always been worried about this. One of the things I brought up in my, again, the last month's newsletter I was talking about a lot of this stuff. I was talking about the Espo pipeline and all this stuff, and the bridge across the Amur River that just opened finally, which is the first land bridge that connects eastern Russia with northern China. If you look at the roads out there, they all go along the river on both sides of the river, and there are no bridges. Okay, because it's like a time capsule to look at the Sino-Soviet split. Okay, so that bridge is very important, but it's also a potential danger. After the West has been left behind, then it's Russia and China, and Russia's the weaker power. So we want to be, so when you think in those grand strategic terms, they want the United States to survive in some form, their own, the dissolution of its own empire. And maybe the real empire that's failing is not the United States empire, but Europe's, the bigger European empire, of which the United States is just one small aberration. Well, Alex, the last time you and I were, a couple of times when we were on, we did the show. I remember you saying, the Chinese view of history is very long, right? And it was one of the Chinese foreign ministers. I don't know if it's the current one or a previous one. It's like, what do you think about the French Revolution? Well, it's too early to tell, right? So this is the kind of thinking that's going on east of the Dnieper River. Yeah. And we have to keep that in mind when we make our comments about what's happening. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
All right. Herding Cat says, saw your guest on Whitney Webb, Unlimited Hangout. Great show today. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Cats. Hazen Pingree says, any interested in the U.S. energy sector? Look into the origins of the Flint water crisis. Jennifer Granholm signed off on what would become one of the largest water crises in the history of the United States. Perfect Davos resume criteria.
Oh yeah, Granholm she's a horrible apparatchik. I don't know this. I don't remember the specific thing, but I'm not surprised. These people are absolute vandals, and nothing that they do surprises me anymore. They're desperately trying to destroy U.S. food security, U.S. military security, everything. The border security.
Now that you mention food security, this is one of the most interesting things. Just going back to what what I said about Putin. But he made that, I think I mentioned it before in that program that we did some time ago together. He actually said the United States had food security until very recently. It had the best, amazing agricultural system. There was a big food exporter. They were self-sufficient in food. And this is this is a tremendous achievement of which the US was rightly proud and which we should try to emulate.
Yes.
And then he says, now, of course, because of these bad policies that have been followed, the US has lost it, has lost that food security that it used to have. But we must copy what the US did before, as opposed to what it is doing now. It's quite an interesting statement.
And to remind everyone,
yeah,
it would not be very hard for us to get that back.
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
The infrastructure is here. Now, the know-how, however, is the problem. One of the big, Jim Rogers brings this up all the time, or has brought this up for years. The hollowing out and the financialization of the United States economy. The biggest problem with it is that everybody wants to be stockbrokers and political analysts and movie stars and not be farmers. The average age of a farmer in the United States is somewhere north of 60 years. Okay. That's the problem. Now, I can tell you that, like everything else, I'm seeing a shift amongst people. I'm seeing a shift younger, as these opportunities go away, as these, the big shift for the American people going into the next 10 years is going to be this mindset of, hey, maybe Mike Rowe's right. Maybe becoming a welder isn't so bad. Maybe, being a pipe fitter is not so bad. Maybe being a farmer is not so bad. Hey, I can make 125 grand a year fitting pipe. I can live like that for 10 years, and then I can go do something else with my life. And then I have enough money to buy a house and buy a gentleman's farm or do whatever I want. I mean, there's a profound shift coming with the next turn of the generations here in the U.S. Okay? My daughter is at the vanguard of the next generation. She's 16. In the U.S. And I think that generation is going to surprise a lot of people because they're going to grow up in, basically depression. They're going to grow up very conservative. And we're beginning to see a shift culturally within the U.S. And we're reaching peak woke, and we're going to move down. And it's going to be a very tough 20 years. And the question is going in front of us is, what's that 20 years going to look like? We have it. We have a way out if we're willing to embrace it, and we're willing to embrace a little pain and tighten our belts. We can do it. We're capable of it. Then we can get that, and we can kick all the oligarchs out. But it's going to be very, very, very difficult.
Much harder in Europe. That's what I'm going to say. I mean, Europe's problems are much more complex and far more profound.
Yes.
Yeah. Trevor Lynn, thank you for that super sticker. Lady Cosmica says, as I'm sure you've heard, Boris the Clown is now saying we need more women in power, and if Putin was a young woman, then he wouldn't be invading. In that case, can I identify as Putin? Then I'd invade the UK and send all of the clowns to Siberia.
Brilliant.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Lady Cosmic, for that. Awesome. Super
absolutely.
chat.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Thank you, Lady Cosmic. and welcome also on this chat. Can I just say, Putin did actually respond to that. And he said, that Boris Johnson is obviously forgetting Margaret Thatcher, who fought a war in the Falklands. And, she was a woman and, whatever.
I would have been less politic, and I would have said, Boris, put away your man boobs, dude, or get a bra, something like,
The very interesting thing about Putin's comment about Thatcher is that it was barely published here in Britain.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not surprised, but it did the meme. It did the meme thing across this space. It was great. That was a perfect response to it, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Sanjeva says, one of two, supplement to Nicholas' question, do you believe in peak oil demand by 2030 based on the ridiculous net zero goals? I heard Austria acknowledge non-achievability of net zero by 2050 as they fired up the coal refineries. And the second part is also, how can you achieve net zero beyond ideological hoodwinking? Solar, wind, hydroelectricity will not suffice, and batteries simply are not developed. So it's all hope and prayers. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. There is one way. You kill off 6 billion people. Okay.
So, yeah.
No, he's not
Well,
wrong. I mean, I just wanted to leave that there with the pregnant pause.
No.
I do not believe in peak oil demand unless we start the replacement cycle from an energy standpoint, where we start going up the energy reserve returned over energy invested curve away from uranium and oil. Okay, that ratio, we have to deal with that. There's another thing on the periodic table that we've been fighting a war against for 70 years because we wanted to make nuclear weapons, and that's thorium, which has a much higher return on energy over energy invested to go grab it out of off the beaches of Florida, for fuck's sake. So no, pardon my French. So no, I don't believe in peak oil demand because I don't see the infrastructure, the will, the political will, or anything else. I think their net zero ideas are just nonsense, and they either have to kill off everybody to supply the energy necessary to run an inefficient world.
Yeah.
At which point they're not even going to live very well, or they allow the oil to flow. And I think the 77% of the world that's now part of the global South that's not going on with the sanctions, I think they're going to buy all the oil that they want, and they're going to burn all the oil they want. As they urbanize.
Yeah, I mean, our substitute for fossil fuels, let's be straightforward about it, is hot air from our politicians, because that's what we have.
Yeah. Summer of 1970 says, any predictions on gold prices?
Oh, they're going much higher, but it's going to be. But we have to get through this ugly dollar wave first. This ugly dollar bull wave, which is draining liquidity around the world, and the rampant attack on safe havens from every corner, and that includes Bitcoin, includes gold, includes silver. Right now, Christine Lagarde made it abundantly clear. With a horrified look on her face, she said, "We have to have global cryptocurrency regulation because otherwise people will use it as an escape hatch, or it's an escape hatch and people will use it." And she was horrified by the idea. Like, she got the vapors for Christ's sake. So, watching this play out right now, there's a coordinated attack across all these markets. The deflation, global recession trade narrative is going to hold this summer because it's the summer. And the guys and the 2 and 20 carried interest guys are already in the Hamptons, and they're not trading, and there's no liquidity. And when there's no liquidity, there's high volatility. It's the summer.
Yeah. None of this is investment advice, by the way.
Of course not.
Yeah. Gorgon says, saw a panel recently that included Catherine A. Fitz on Unlimited Hangout channel, and most believed the big money has already chosen East over West and facilitating the tables turning. Your thoughts?
No, I don't. They wouldn't be trying to start World War III otherwise. That fits in with this idea that Putin is a WEF puppet narrative. I don't. I think people like Catherine Austin Fitz are well intentioned. I do. I just happen to disagree with them. I think I think a lot of people like that. There's a lot of old commentators in this space that have been doing this for a very long time, that have old maps of the world, and they have not updated those maps, and they have lost relevancy. These are people I used to listen to. These are people that helped me to awaken me 20 years ago. Okay, so I say this with the highest level of respect, but I also have to say this in such a way as to realize for people to realize it is actually more complicated, because it's one thing to run these models about who these people are and what the plan is, when the plan isn't in the process of goring everybody's ox in an existential manner. But once everybody's ox is gored and it's laying on the ground and people are going, dude, I can't eat tomorrow. Now all of a sudden the knives come out and the cartels break down and the old relationships break down, and dredging up articles from 20 years ago, how they went to a party together, doesn't mean anything, because they may have been friends then, but they're not friends now. It's like, do you really believe Donald Trump was just doing their job, doing their business, they're bidding for them? Are you kidding me? What's wrong with you? Just because you got a picture of him with Jeffrey Epstein from the 1980s? Like whatever. Like, this is dumb. This is pattern recognition without synthesis and without being willing to look at. So I caution everybody about a lot of these analysts who've been doing this stuff for a long time, because they're literally been saying the same thing for 20 years. And they've been wrong for most of those 20 years. While getting the broad strokes right, they've been wrong about all their predictions. Sorry. I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but the hour is too late for us to wait for them to upgrade their mental maps. They're not going to.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I mean, I know some people who engage in investment. I haven't seen any sign of big old money moving east. Not yet.
No.
I haven't seen it.
No, I think it's an idea. I look.
I mean, it may happen.
Look, at the end of the day, I got news for you. David Morgan, Ted Butler, Eric Sprott. They all have to sell newsletters.
Yeah,
they got to sell. They got a business.
Yeah,
they talk their book. Peter Schiff. They're all. I'm doing the same thing, except you'll note that. Yeah. At some point, I'm going to be wrong. Right? I'm going to be wrong one day. I'm going to not stay up with the times. No. I'm going to take my eye off the ball. I'm just going to run. I'm going to run on autopilot, and I'm going to get something catastrophically wrong. And then the question is going to be, am I going to be man enough to state that I was wrong and then shift my mental map? Yeah. I've been able to do it in the past. Yeah. We'll see. But right now, I'll put my predictions up against anybody else's. Yeah. And I don't mean that arrogantly. I mean that, and the same thing with the two men I'm talking to right now, and most of the people who are listening to this. Y'all are part of this hive mind. My community, the Duran's community, it's helping to inform all of us, and we're just the presenters of these ideas.
Yeah,
we're just the distillation of all the work that you do.
Yeah,
and we're getting there, and we're winning.
Yeah.
So, and you keep
well, here's a question that ties into what you're saying.
Sure.
Tom, from Innisfad, the global situation is very interesting, but what do we, as quote peasants, do with our pensions, bank accounts, etc., so that they're not rendered meaningless?
Yeah, I saw that comment earlier. The best you can do right now is try and survive this. Don't try and thrive it. I mean, unless you're very, very good at picking stocks and whatnot, what I would suggest you do is you just be you just be careful. You know your counterparties. One of the things I preach to people all the time, and maybe I haven't preached in a while, but how about this one? Look at where your life is. Know who your counterparties are. Who's the counterparty on your mortgage if you have one? Who's the counterparty on your 401k? Who's the or your investment, your retirement fund? Who's the counterparty on your brokerage account? Blah 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 blah. And what I can tell you is that the best way to make sure that you don't have everything rendered meaningless is to reduce the amount of counterparty risk that you're dependent upon someone else staying solvent during a massive crisis. And I can't give you specific understanding of that or a specific answer to that, but because my stock answer is got news for you. There are only a few assets that have no counterparty risk. Gold, Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this is where we are. So you make that decision. And then, but at the same time, there are going to be bull markets. There's serious discussions here about bull markets, about who's going to be and who's not going to be in a bull market going forward. And it doesn't even take a great investing mind to know that, if you can do so with minimal counterparty risk. I'm looking at the Chinese stock markets and I'm going, wow, they're on sale. If I'm thinking generationally.
Right.
As an American, I can no longer look at the Russian markets, even though I was trying to prepare people for this for the last 10 years saying, dude, buy Russia. And I was right until they took it all away from us because of government fiat, which is the government diktat. Until, we'll see what happens in the next couple of years. But, if you're in I don't know where you are, so where you are, where your jurisdiction is, shore up your life, get rid of your counterparties, get rid of your debt, get rid of your obligations. be cash flow positive, and build out your personal network of people whom you trust. That is the key.
Not investment advice from Edward
No,
Bixisi.
never.
He says,
Never investment
excellent
advice. I'm just some asshole on the internet.
Well said. Excellent show. Recently found out about you and Tom Luongo from Mike Penovich, not Cernovich, on the TRS podcasts. He would make a great guest on your program. Thanks for all you do. Thank you for that. Edward, the spy guy, says, I watched Eli from Russia interview of a U.S. expat, and he was trying to build a little America in Moscow. Perhaps there will be places to go. Apparently, there is almost no housing regulation in Russia.
Yeah, I don't know that much granularly about the Russian markets. I just know that they have a 13% flat tax and an income cap on Social Security requirements, and I'm like,
no. Hazen said, "Here's a down payment on the swear jar for Tom." Thank you for that, Hazen.
I will do my best not to.
Beard Flies, thank you for that awesome super sticker. Thank you very much, Beard Flies. And from Ago, the biggest factor in oil price is global growth forecast. Oil price is dropping because we are in recession, not because Biden beat inflation.
I think that, yeah, I understand that argument. There's other issues. Like in the short term, we're going to have oil's probably going to trend sideways for a while, but it's building a base between 100 and 120 before a move to 140 to 150. We're going to have a structural deficit in the oil market because of lack of investment and because of lack of new production coming online. And oh, by the way, because the world is building out and moving on without us. And so while, a lot of the world is beginning to, the de-dollarization and deglobalization is coming. It's not even coming, it's here. Okay. And the next couple of years are going to be very, very weird. We're still going to see asset price deflation and commodity price inflation. I mean, we've had a lot of commodity price inflation. We could stand a year's worth of none, and we would still have had a massive commodity price inflation. Like, industrial metals are all trading above their normal, their historical highs. They've corrected back to their historical highs. So we're looking at aluminum at $1.50 a pound. We're looking at, or $2 a pound. We're looking at lead at $1.50 a pound. We're looking at nickel at $10 a kilogram or whatever the nickel prices are. You're looking at U.S. natural gas prices when they've ever been above $4 an MCF, for example. That has been a sell signal of epic proportions. Going back 30 years, it's trading above 6. I think maybe it's 5.80 this morning. Maybe we'll see a correction back to 4, but we're never going to see $2 natural gas in the United States again. Okay. So the Fed has sterilized a lot of money. There's $6 trillion worth of sterilized dollars sitting on as excess reserves with the banking system and within the reverse repo markets. I'm not saying that they're going to let that money fly at any point, but they have the ability to let that money into the system at any time that they want. And they will, but they're not going to let that money into the system until they have full control over the transmission system of those dollars global. And they do not have full control over that yet. The Eurodollar markets have not been destroyed. So we'll see what happens.
Boomer 50 says, "Hey, Tom, you're like the Dave Ramsey of geopolitics."
Cool. I'll take that as a compliment. I think it's a compliment.
Yeah, it's a compliment. Roman, thank you for that super sticker. Let's see here. Antonio, thank you for that super sticker. Illuminated Best Choice, thank you for that super chat. Illuminated Best Choice, thank you for that super sticker. Michael Tombros says, "What do you think of the Greek F-35 deal, guys?"
Oh, I'll leave that one for Alexander. I'm interested in what he has to say about this.
Well, I think that it's a time we're spending money on arms when we've got more things to worry about. I mean, we do always have the problem with Erdogan and Turkey, which is true. But do we really want F-35s at the moment? And the one thing, of course, it's going to do is guaranteed to infuriate Erdogan.
French.
Alex,
about the
you're
French?
going to.
I was going to ask you, what about the French?
and
The Raphaels that
French.
the Greeks were supposedly
yeah.
buying a bunch of,
Well,
and now all of a sudden, is this like an AUKUS part 2?
Well, it is an AUKUS. Of course it is. Of course it's an AUKUS. Of course it's an AUKUS part 2. And note also that Germany is going to be moving towards F-35s as well. I've no doubt about it. None. I mean, so, the F-35 is going to sweep the board in Europe. And it's going to do so because there's no effective European competition, either at the political or the industrial level. I mean, France has its aircraft industry, but ultimately, if you're talking about a country like Greece, the United States holds much greater sway there. So it's I think it's bad. It's a bad thing for Greece. I think it's going to infuriate. Well, it's going to be bad for France, but there we are. That's the way.
No one seems to care about it within NATO. No one seems to care about what France thinks. Does anybody notice that this weekend?
Well, absolutely, and that is completely true because, of course, France has in effect neutered itself because the French president Macron had his opportunity to make a real move. He could have acted decisively in the weeks running up to the war. He was the one political leader who might have stopped it, and he didn't.
And he was told not to.
Every now and then he did.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
but I gather that Putin has had absolutely as much of him as he can take, apparently.
Oh,
I mean, Putin has listened to Macron for hours, and Macron always comes up with, incredibly clever phrases and comments, ideas, suggestions, but there's never any substance behind it. And he never has anything practical, anything anybody can work with to say. And from that moment on, when the war began, Macron lost all authority and credibility. Now, and this is beginning to be, well, this is not beginning. I mean, this is well understood in France. And note that he got through the presidential election because, the French were still not willing to vote for Marine Le Pen as president of France. But of course, when the legislative elections came, his party did far worse than he expected. And apparently he's still in shock about it. He spent the whole day after the election result in complete silence, invisible and silent.
So he must have taken election loss tips from Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. Well, he clearly did. But in any event, I mean, the fact is nobody listens to France. France has lost massive influence. Yes. The running is not being made by the French anymore.
Yeah, no, the situation between Greece and Turkey and something that FYI for everybody in the audience, Alex C is going to be and I are going to record a podcast tomorrow morning. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let Alex talk, as opposed to Alex sitting here very, very studiously letting Alex M and I talk. So I'm really looking forward to that, just to finally have a nice long sit down chat with you about whatever comes to mind. The situation with Greece and Turkey, I think, is dangerous. And, Erdogan is Erdogan, whatever his name is. I don't like the guy, so I don't care if I mispronounce his name. So it doesn't really matter. Erdogan is, he's that Wile E. Coyote character. He's constantly seeing some opportunity, even when there may not be one there. And I have to wonder if he's allowing Finland and Sweden in the NATO. I understand, Alex, your point that you made this morning in the video that he's just going to milk this for another year to get whatever concessions he can get out of the United States. But he's going to be hopping mad about everybody else getting the F-35 and he being kicked out of the program.
Well, he's going to. I think he'll get into the program, Mike. But either way, he did the same thing with Syria, with the EU. Remember that, Alexander? I mean, with withholding the migrants, the jihadists, whatever. All these 3 million, he had them sitting in Turkey, and every time he needed a couple of billion, he'd call over Angela Merkel. Right. Angela would fly to Ankara.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the angles like this is speaking about Turkey and Finland and Sweden and all that. One of the angles that no one picked up on was that
Yeah.
the Turkish lira was under attack again
Yeah.
after a couple of months of it, of Erdogan trying to put it under control and yada yada yada. And then it was under attack again. It was back above 18, and then Biden went to Turkey. And then 24 hours later, and then when Biden was in Turkey, the lira, all that pressure on the lira started to abate.
Yeah.
And then 24 hours later, Erdogan came to an agreement with Biden about Finland and Sweden, telling you again, as always, Erdogan traded. This is what he traded. He traded an end to the attack on the lira, possibly temporarily, for right now. That's what he got in concession. He said he told the Davos in the U.S., you stop trying to destroy my currency, and I'll allow the process for Finland. I'll let you write your headline.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the headline. It's all it is, because as
Here's all it is.
It's Alex pointed out this morning, it's going to take it a year. And in a year, Finland and Sweden being in NATO might not even matter.
Yeah. Again, it's striking to see how completely relaxed Putin is about this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he basically said, Sweden and Finland, I don't care.
Do what you want.
Do what you want.
Like every idea that is cooked up in Bellingcat and the MI6 to try and get Putin on tilt. Have you noticed how he just whatever,
shrugs his shoulders?
You people are so 19th century. Just whatever. Please stop. Would you please stop? And if you don't stop, at some point, I'm gonna unleash Medvedev, and he's just going to wipe your horrible little country off the planet.
Yeah.
Red Pill Scholar says, thank you, gentlemen, for all you do. God bless you. Thank you, Red Pill Scholar, for that. Eric, thank you for that super sticker. John, thank you for that super sticker. Mark Hewitt. Tom, if there is a MAGA wave in November, what, if any, will the Dems and the Rhinos attempt to do until the new Congress convenes in January 2023?
Well, that's a loaded question. And man, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about it a lot.
Mm.
I had a guy on my podcast the other day, Bill Faywell, wrote a book called Notes on the Revolution, mostly completely censored guy. I didn't even realize what I mean. I didn't even realize I was giving him a huge platform because he had been censored down. So it was fine. It was cool. I had him on the show, and he was talking, and he and I were going back and forth about this. And he's like, they got to get rid of Biden before the inauguration of the new sitting of the new Congress. They've got to get rid of him. They got to install Kamala Harris so that she can be, and get her in place so that they have the smooth transition. Because if they don't, then they'll impeach Biden and they'll go after Harris as well, and go after Harris as well. It's a very interesting argument. I still am betting on them getting rid of Biden and Harris and putting in Janet Yellen. That's what I think. And I still see that. I still see Davos obsessed with moving central bankers into positions of power.
Interesting.
I mean, so Mario Draghi in Italy, effectively Emmanuel Macron in France, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Christine Lagarde now in charge of I'm just waiting for Christine Lagarde to be elevated to head of, sent back to the IMF. Right.
Yeah.
So
the transition. Go on.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. That's a good question. I can't give you a really good answer. Just know that they're going to try and ram through as much horrible crap as possible and leave as many.
Absolutely.
Poison. They've already started the poison pill process 6 months ago.
I know.
Because they knew they were going to lose.
I mean, this is exactly what happened. I mean, remember that terrible transition between Trump winning in November 2016 and getting inaugurated. I mean, that those 3 months. I mean, the amount of damage that was done. Exactly. I mean, the amount of damage that was done. And, he never really got back on. He never really got on top of things.
No, the minute he threw Michael Flynn under the bus, his presidency was over.
I know. Absolutely. But I mean, in a sense, the whole business of Flynn was set up during the transition. I mean, it was all worked out through then. So, I mean, we're going to have a wild transition.
It's going to be awful. I don't even think they're going to be able. I'm even half tempted to believe they're not going to be able to sit they might even be able to sit Congress because so many seats are going to be under dispute.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't think that they're not going to they're not going to file 300 freaking lawsuits to keep them from seating a Congress. Like, don't think this is beyond these people. Nothing is beyond these people. We now have these people telling us it's okay to, for trannies to twerk in front of 12-year-olds or 8-year-olds, and somehow that this is not against common decency laws all across the United States. Like, think about what they're willing to do. They're calling Clarence they're calling Clarence Thomas the word that no one's allowed to say.
Yeah.
Openly.
Yeah.
Like, they have lost their minds and they do not care. And the response from like Roe v. Wade has been, it's not working, but it's actually working for their opposition, but they don't care.
Yeah.
They're that far gone. Yeah. And I've been saying for a long time, and this is part of some of what I said earlier about don't wish the end of the American empire, is the following. Davos is really good at creating stories within the United States that make it look like we're falling apart. We're not. Life's pretty freaking normal, actually. We all America to me looks the way America has always looked, other than like the prices and the amount of seething anger. Right. Yeah. And one of the points that Bill Faywell is that when you have this much anger, it's only then when you can actually have an honest to God revolution. Yeah. And I can't disagree with it. What the form of that's going to look like is anybody's business. But never believe 90% of don't believe 90% of what you hear. I don't believe 90% of the stories about unrest in Iran that I hear. I don't believe 90% of the stories I hear about unrest in Russia or this place or that place, because they're not real. Twitter isn't real life, and what they produce about us, and like, people still go to church in the United States. They still get up in the morning. They still go to work, and they may not like each other, but like, we are not on the verge of a violent or collapse. And I hear this from American expats all the time. They read the freaking newspapers and they just think the whole place is a war zone. I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, maybe the Texas border is, but maybe California is maybe the inner cities are, oh, look, we're back to the 1970s again. I mean, I drive through some of the cities. I drove through Seattle. I drove through, I drove, like, dude, it looks like New York in the 70s. Have you ever driven through the South Bronx? Like, we've weathered this in the past. We can weather it again, depending on whether or not we have that red wave. And that red wave has to be substantive, and transformative.
Yeah. Can I just quickly say that in Britain, what you read about, things falling apart is true. I mean, I live here. I mean, it is very bad. And I brought it up many times now, but I'm going to bring it up again. About 2 weeks ago, I sent to Alex, I'm not going to publish it, but Alex has seen it, a photograph of a food bank and an enormous queue, 50 seconds distance on foot from my house in a very affluent part of London. So, I mean, that gives you some sense of the way things are going here.
No, I mean, we have. I've seen food lines in the United States that are disturbing. I'm not gonna lie to you, but it's a funny thing. People in Europe don't realize quite how big America is.
Yeah,
like, they just don't understand,
no.
like, how far a lot of people are from the centers of power or the centers of population or anything else. How big the United States is, until you actually get in a car and start driving across it. And then you realize, holy Christ, it really is. 350 miles is a long way, going from Miami to more. I mean, if I go to visit a friend on the other side of the state, I'm in the same state, and I've still driven 6 hours. Like, and so there's all of these little enclaves of culture all across the United States. And like, the ability for them to weather the worst economic storms are actually really quite capable, because of the decentralized nature of the governments, because diktats from Washington just don't reach those people. Eventually, the gas price is ridiculous or whatever, but we can figure it out. There's still a lot of that out there. And I said, it's not as highly urbanized as people want to believe it. But the cities don't go to them. Like, not a good idea. But there you go. I don't know. I just think it's gonna. I know that they're attacking the suburbs. My biggest worry is the BlackRock taking over the suburbs, and then Obama zip code targeting and putting a whole bunch of, the whole bunch of Somalis in the suburbs and destroying the cohesion there. That's what they've been doing. That is the biggest thing. That's a big thing. And that's not going to stand. That is driving people up a freaking wall. And it's going to be, when Americans get angry, you want that anger directed at Washington, not at the rest of the world. Washington is going to do everything imaginable to try and direct it to the rest of the world. Don't let it happen. Don't cheer it on. But cheer us on as we go after Washington.
Let's see here. Where are we? Elena says, shouldn't NATO countries with good finances like Norway help the others so NATO was uniform and cohesive? I mean, Stoltenberg wants more NATO. Shouldn't Norway be among those who pay?
Oh, well, I mean, that would be a wonderful idea. I'm sure that would make people in Norway think very carefully about all of that. Can I just say, I mean, the whole concept of both NATO and the EU was founded on the idea that all of these countries would each contribute according to their means to the common defense. I mean, just as the EU set up, that was the story that was told. Now, of course, in the EU, and we've discussed this so many times, all three of us in different formats, remember no fiscal transfers? Remember all that? I mean, and you've seen how that's been eroded. If you're going to start talking about fiscal transfers within NATO, which is what this is, well, I mean, you're again in a completely different situation. I mean, I think Davos would probably love it. Actually, it'd be another way of centralizing everything and bringing.
Well, that's what they're the ones arguing for these schemes, obviously.
Exactly, obviously. But I have to say, in truth, I think that electorates would really balk at this. I mean, you can do it with smoke and mirrors, fiscal transfers in terms of the EU, and you've always got this propaganda about the EU being necessary in all of this. But the idea that Germans pay money so that the Greeks can buy F-35s, it's not going to play well in Germany. And if you're doing that so that the French can't sell Rafales, it's not going to play well in France either. So I mean, having said that, don't assume these kind of things might not happen.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right, Alex. And I think about it now, and I'm like, like Lagarde's new QE scheme is purely fiscal transfer. Yeah. While they boycott, while they sanction Hungary and say you have to pay into the EU, but you get no benefit from it. Yes. So why am I still there? Says Viktor Orban. At which point, someone I know asked the question of whether or not Russia will take Odessa. I saw that come through the super chat.
Yeah, that was a question. Yeah.
How about we address that right now? Well, that's what it's. If Russia does take Odessa, which the answer to that will be yes. When Russia does take take Odessa and incorporates it into the Russian Federation, or by extension, Novorossiya, which is aligned with the CSTO and yada yada yada, by treaty, the Russians now have access to the Danube River system, and once they have that, all of Eastern Europe has a non-EU transfer system out of. If they all decide to leave, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Hungary, whatnot, they need a non-EU transport corridor out of down to the sea. Yeah. Okay. Because Greece is not good enough. No. Thessaloniki is not good enough because it's EU. We're already blockade. The EU is already trying to blockade Serbia with oil and gas. They're using Bulgaria to blockade to try and they've threatened block import and energy blockades. Right. They're doing this on purpose. So they're using. That's why they want these countries in, so that they can use them as strategic blockades. The Russians get control of the Danube River system. All of a sudden, all the Visegrads minus Poland now have access. All those landlocked countries now have access to a Russian port where they can go. They can leave the EU and still get access to the Black Sea. Makes a very, very. This is what Kissinger was talking about. without saying it at Davos. We
Yeah.
need to end this now before the Russians dictate terms to us.
Exactly.
And the terms will be
That's exactly.
Russia will get access to the Danube, which will change the strategic layout for all of Eastern Europe. So you Eastern Europeans in the audience, you want the Russians to take Odessa. It gives you the optionality of staying in the EU or leaving and still retaining your economics or getting back some of your economic sovereignty and political sovereignty.
Yeah.
They're screwed.
I completely agree with all of this. Again, Odessa is just within our world, Alex's world, and mine. The Eastern Mediterranean. They all connect. Perhaps more obviously in Greece, maybe, than in Cyprus. But Odessa looms over southeastern Europe to an extraordinary degree, to a degree that isn't understood. It did during the 18th century when Catherine the Great created it, and it has done ever since. Greek independence was forged in Odessa. Oh, right. That was where the Greeks came. The Greek diaspora came together, and they set up the society that planned Greek independence. And the Tsar of Russia was, of course, involved in all of that. So Odessa is absolutely determinative. And, we did a program, Alex and I, and we were talking about Turkey's role and, Turkey remaining part of NATO or not. And, of course, now in Turkey, it's becoming increasingly widespread, even within sort of establishment circles, to question whether NATO actually serves Turkey's interests. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'd actually expect it to happen. Right. But let's assume it did. Odessa, you have the Black Sea, which is, as you correctly say, connected to the Danube. You then have the passage through the Dardanelles into the Eastern Mediterranean. You now have a major Russian base in Syria, where
protecting the access point to the Black Sea.
Absolutely. And remember that the Black Sea is connected by canal and river to the Caspian Sea. You can use warships from the Caspian Sea, so it's a safe haven, and the Caspian Sea in turn, and of course the Black Sea, especially if the southern areas of Ukraine come under Russian control. They also connect with the Russian riverine system, with the rivers and canals. And I've seen these rivers and canals. And, you mustn't assume that they're like the rivers and canals in Western Europe. This is more like, the Mississippi. These are huge. I mean, they're enormous. Real ships can travel in them. It's like the Rhine, for example. They're enormous. I mean, the River Kama, which I have seen, for example, the Volga, there's enormous things. So if you do that, you are going to change the balance of economic and military and geopolitical power right across southeastern Europe, all the way into the Eastern Mediterranean. And that's the stakes you're playing with.
That's just the tip. You think about just this. You've got access now to Sochi. You've got access now to Rostov-on-Don. The minute you start this process, you got the access to Mariupol. You can move. You're going to have rail. I mean, even if you don't want to move, you're going to get to Odessa. I mean, there's some issues with, Western European and Russian rail gauges. They're not the same. So you move by ship to the Eastern Black Sea, you offload there, and then you get into the north-south transport corridor system, right? And now all of a sudden, all that logistics takes over because that's what's coming. Like all of that stuff, like the north-south transport corridor from St. Petersburg down to Chabahar, up into Afghanistan, and then across, and then from Bandar Abbas all the way across Pakistan and into Western China. Like all that's coming. Like the Russians are already they're all working this stuff out, and the Iranians are going to be a major part of the centralization trade across. They're going to take their central role as the crossroads of Asia. Like all of this is happening, and Russia takes Odessa, and the whole game board changes.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything about the prospects for Eastern Europe changed completely.
Absolutely.
And for the first time ever, these people could, in a long, not ever, but in a long, long time in modern history, could be actually free of the colonial powers west of them, and frankly, the colonial powers east of them.
East of them, yeah.
So it's in their best interest.
Yeah.
All right. Ryan says, great show as always. Tom, what is your take on analysts murmuring that stock market in the U.S. could lose half of its value in the next year? How bad does this bear market get since the U.S. is in recession now?
I don't think the bear market gets nearly as bad as a lot of people are arguing for. I've been arguing that the Dow, and I remember three things. The Dow is the measure of international capital inflow to the United States. The S&P 500 is the broad vote, yay or nay, on the American domestic economy, and the Nasdaq is kind of your growth economy. And those definitions are changing a little bit, but reality is that if Europe becomes an economic smoking hole, there's still trillions of dollars in Europe that need to flow out, and we're already seeing, relatively speaking, the Dow hold up better than the DAX, hold up better than the Nasdaq and the S&P, and a lot of other indexes, and that's telling you that there's international capital flow into the United States at a marginal level, along with, of course, the American bond markets. If Jerome Powell does what I think he's trying to do, which is to destroy the euro-dollar markets and reset the board, the monetary board, it's going to be bad for everybody. But we're not going to see a 90% collapse in the S&P 500. People who are arguing for that are domestically focused analysts who refuse to accept the fact that global capital exerts far more pressure on the world and far more pressure on markets than fundamentals or budget numbers or PMIs or any of the other shit. Markets move on momentum and sentiment, and they move on global capital flow. Now, if the global capital is looking at the G7 and are horrified by it, once we get rid of Biden, once there's a political revolution in the United States, who looks better than all those guys? The U.S. Why is Davos so desperate to make it look like the United States is spiraling out of control and that we have no political leadership? To freeze capital in Europe, to freeze capital in emerging markets, to freeze that capital and say, don't go there. Where do you go? The Chinese are not going to help this process. Of course, they're going to turn around and they're going to amplify this. The Russians are going to amplify this to us, but that's like niggling shit compared to what's really going on here. So, like, reality is everybody has a vested interest in making the United States look as bad as possible because it benefits them in some short term. But the reality is that the American commercial banks have far more capacity to exert political pressure than people want to give them credit for, and I think they're going to win. And so, watch this space very carefully, because when you do the big analysis of the four big areas of the world at this point, and I'm leaving aside South America, I'm leaving aside Africa, I'm leaving aside even Southeast Asia, kind of, because they're not politically, they're important, but they're not the big power centers at this point. There's four major power centers: the United States, Europe, Russia, and China. They're the ones involved in the war. Everybody else is trying to figure out, with India playing an interesting pivotal role. But those are the four areas that everybody's looking at and trying to decide who's going to go to war with whom and who's going to come out on top and in what order. And the operations of the collapse of some of them is going to determine which ones, where everybody else is going to jump. And what we're seeing so far is everybody's starting to jump with Russia and China. Yeah. And because of that, Europe is left as the weak man at the table, as Alex keeps pointing out, filling in the color of just what I see as well. So I see a sharp correction in the Dow, a spasm sometime before the end of the year, maybe coming in October surprise right before the election. Ooh, what are the odds of that? Okay. I think I just, make a craps. I'd make a craps thing metaphor, but it would sound dirty, so I'm not going to do that. Yeah, that's what I think is going to happen. And after that, I would go long U.S. stocks. That's like I've been telling everybody for months. I'm like, hold your water, stay 30% cash, toe dip on really good stocks you really like that are on sale, and just wait for the spasm and then go long. Go along the U.S. because for 18 months to 2 years, it's going to be a bonsai as all the capital flows here out of Europe, because it has nowhere else to go. The U.S. capital markets, for all their faults, are still the deepest and most liquid in the world. Now, is some of that capital going to flow to Russia? Yes. Some of that capital going to flow to China? Yes. Singapore? Yes. Southeast Asia? Yes. Brazil? Yes. Are those markets going to get more professional? Are they going to get better? Are they going to get deeper? Absolutely. Is that why I'm calling for China to open up for real post-COVID now? Absolutely. The Chinese are going to start to loosen monetary policy while everybody else strengthens, because that's what China always does. They always go opposite what everybody else does during this coordinated central bank policy, or when everybody else is net tightening, the Chinese are loosening. When everybody is net loosening, the Chinese are tightening. They do it all the time. They've been doing it for 15 years. None of that will change. And so they do that, and they can professionalize and deepen their bond markets and start internationalizing the yuan to a greater extent, which is also what's on the table. The Russians should be thinking exactly the same terms as why Navalny needs to lower rates into around the 5.5-6% range, and just give a massive vote of confidence to the Russian economy, and then let the capital come in and let all the infrastructure spending fly, and then this whole thing gets turbocharged and setting up for that big shift within a decade. But in the short term, that 2 or 3 year period, the United States is going to look good. And if we effect a sincere political revolution in the United States, then we will not break up. We will not lose our political stability. We will go through a decade of terror, of terrible times, which we need to. Slightly mitigated for the first couple of years with the capital inflow. And then it's all going to flow back out again. And that's when the real comeuppance comes for the United States. But if we've pledged fiscal reform and we've pledged entitlement reform politically, and we've had a sincere change of heart politically, and we've pulled back on the empire and we pull back on all these things, then we'll be able to muddle through. There's a lot of things, we have a lot of options once we're not under the control of Davos vandals trying to destroy us. I'm dead serious about this. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I give it about a 25% probability, but that's the roadmap. So we'll see.
All right. So we're approaching 2.5 hours. Actually, we are at 2 hours and 30 minutes. Do you guys want to go for another 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you've got more comments and questions that need to be answered, I'm okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let me go through the questions that are addressed to you, Tom, and whatever questions we don't get to, me and Alexandra will dedicate a video to all those questions.
And if they're specific for Tom, we can pass them on to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be happy to either give you a written response or
if I miss some as I'm looking through the list, we will send it off to Tom.
Yeah.
Dan wants to know, question for Tom: considering the U.S. debt and spending, if it's not seeking a default, what options does the USA have other than full-blown war with the East?
Yeah, I saw that comment earlier, and I'm glad he brought it up. The option in front of the United States is entitlement reform, fiscal reform, and a tight Federal Reserve, creating a safe harbor, creating the illusion of a safe harbor United States for a couple of years by basically destroying Europe and putting a lot of emerging markets under pressure. But we're also paying, like I said earlier, the lowest percentage of GDP out as debt servicing that we have ever. So if we pledge fiscal reform now, and we pledge budgetary reform now, we're not going to be issuing a whole lot of new high yield debt. And therefore, we can then look at the older debt that's higher yield, and we can do what Trump and Mnuchin were talking about. Package up some of that older debt, issue it as 50 or 100-year bonds. And the interesting part about this, I listened to a podcast with Judy Shelton, who was who was under Trump. They were trying to get her onto the Federal Reserve Board. You remember, Judy Shelton is an old gold bug. She's an old hard currency type. And what she said in a podcast behind the paywall with Grant Williams, said the thing that was not reported to anybody about that plan was that a portion of the principal of those bonds would be backed by gold. Treasury gold, which would change the bond market, change the bond calculus of the calculus of what that bond is worth in the marketplace based on a potential upward price of the upward revision of the price of gold. That would probably mitigate what the rate on the coupon rate on the bond would be. So therefore, think of it this way: now you finally have an incentive where the Federal Reserve actually wants to see a rising gold price. Something like that is going to come. Then Shelton followed up with something like that is going to come. The question is, who goes there first? That's what's going to determine where global capital flows. I've been saying for years that we're in a race as to when the Chinese and the Russians are going to stop putting their thumb on the scale of the gold price in order to accumulate stink bid prices, which is what they're getting it at now. They're getting it at practically below production costs.
Absolutely.
And then they're going to let their thumb off the scale. And how did the Chinese do? How did the Chinese set off the last wave of the gold market in 2010? They revised their official gold holdings up from 200 and some number of tons to 1,054. The Chinese control 15,000 tons of gold. They say they only control 2,000. If I'm wrong and it's only 10,000 tons, are you still not going to be shocked when they finally admit the truth? Same thing with the Russians. The Russians say they own 2,300 tons of gold. They really probably own closer to 6,000 or 7,000. So the United States has an incentive to beat that to the punch with a properly, with a government with a proper reformist mindset to get to that punch first and say, no, we're going to do this. We're going to issue 50-year bonds, 10% convertible in Treasury gold upon, redemption. Now, does anybody, and now you're taking a 50-year bet against the United States, or you're taking on 50 years worth of duration with the U.S. government. Yeah, they're going to have to pay 3 or 4 or 5% on those bonds. There's no argument there. But if there's a 10% gold cover on that, or a 5% gold cover on that, now all of a sudden that 5% looks like 15. Now you've got all sorts of things you can do. Okay, maybe they even, or I only have to sell those at 2% or 1.5%, while official Fed funds rate is at 8, in order to, sop up all the liquidity, the foreign liquidity. There's a plan here. This could happen, and this is how you get out of it. But it takes an honest to God fiscal reform, and you have to signal to the market you're willing to do that. Markets move on intentions. Look how far the bond markets moved in the last couple of weeks on the intention that Christine Lagarde was going to change the rules. Everybody front ran that trade, and they sold German debt, and they bought Italian debt, and they did all sorts of weird things because they were anticipating her doing it. She didn't even have to do it. This is the thing, and this is what I want you to take away. If we enshrine that stuff in law, we elect the right people, we do the thing, it's possible. Is it a high probability event given the sclerotic endemic corruption in Washington D.C.? No, I'm betting on the Sunshine Republic of Florida and us issuing the gator as our national as our currency. But I'm willing to entertain both ideas because I think we need to remain flexible.
Yeah. All right.
So there you go.
Christian says, great discussion this morning, gentlemen. Tom Luongo is right up there with Robert Barnes. If Robert Barnes drank 25 cups of coffee a day, keep up the good work. Great start to my day. Thank you.
That's high praise
for that. Zariel says, question to Tom. Zero CO2, Green New Deal, net zero. How the hell are the U.S. and NATO going to run all their jeeps, trucks, planes, ships from the military to enforce their dictate without oil, not to mention police?
Yeah, with diesel fuel, they have to buy from the Russians. No. Obviously, we're not going to. Now, obviously, there's no idea. The idea of a NATO war against the Russians is ludicrous.
Yeah.
Again, as to go full circle to what we originally talked about at the beginning of this show, about the article I got on Zero Hedge this morning, which linked to Alex's video about the Rusi article about how we don't have any stamina to even think about fighting this war from an artillery standpoint. Now you throw in the inability. Do you have any idea how much diesel fuel it costs to run a war?
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot more than we're currently doing.
Joanna says, definitely would not recommend driving through downtown LA. More tents keep popping up every year, plus the stench from human waste. This is the worst it's been.
Yeah, no, it is. It is bad. I mean, I was shocked when I went out to visit a friend out in Washington last summer, and he took me around in Olympia, Washington, no less, not even in Seattle, in Olympia. And it was and he took me to the tent camp. She's like, yeah, they're everywhere now. I live in Florida, so seeing vagrants and homeless people on the side of the road is normal because they always travel south. This in the fall it gets worse every fall because they come out of the north and we have snowbird the vagrants as well, and it's just it's been a staple of living in Gainesville for 30 years that I've been here. I don't know that it's worse than it's been, but I don't travel. But then again, I don't really travel into civilization all that often, to be honest with you. And maybe twice a week. And I certainly haven't ventured on the east side of Gainesville for most of my life because the east side of Gainesville is pretty rough. But I mean, I didn't do that when I lived in the city, no less than when I don't live in it. So is it bad? It's worse than it's been. Can it be improved? Only with a fundamental change in policy.
Zariel says, I forgot. I heard Japan is committing financial incest recently. Can Tom comment on it, please?
They are.
Thanks.
They are. The Japanese are acting like Powell's wingman by continuing to do yield curve control on Japanese government bonds, keeping those carry trades alive, and U.S. government debt carry just looks better, and especially as interest rates rise here in the United States. So, and that's just crushing the euro even further, because what's happening is the dollar is strengthening, the yen, the Japanese government bonds are being held at a particular rate, the yen is falling, so the buyer of the short end of the contract borrowing the yen to buy U.S. debt, and the yield spread is actually only getting worse. It's that the return on that trade is only getting better as the yen depreciates, the dollar appreciates, and interest rates rise on the long end of the yield curve, between the two curves, and in the process, the euro yen carry trade has been destroyed as rates rise here and as rates rise in Europe.
Okay, we'll do one more. And we'll wrap it up. From Denitsa on the issue of Eastern Europe, you got me thinking 3 days ago, the Bulgarian minister to resign. He was ordered to expel 70 Russian diplomats, probably so that we cut ties with Russia and don't have the option to choose in or out of the EU.
Absolutely, this is big news, by the way. I missed it, so go ahead. I mean, it's the sting of the dying wasp. I mean, they did this. Massive expulsion of Russian diplomats, and it's in a kind of a way, I think, a little bit like what they did, what we were talking about with the transition period after the midterms. You have a government that's disintegrating, and it's acting rapidly, and of course, it's doing so with encouragement, under orders, if you like, to try to make its policies irreversible. So this is what they did.
Yeah, no,
huge decision.
It's a terrible thing. And
you need to watch Bulgaria. I think the situation there is getting increasingly volatile, actually.
I'm hoping that it spreads to Romania, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I know. Well, quite, but I mean, don't think that the people who are in charge are going to give up easily, because they're absolutely not. And they do have support, and they do have some support in the country as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. They never give up easily. No, never. It's always 3 or 4 layers deep. The not the corruption, but the betrayal of the populist sentiment. It's always 3 or 4 layers deep. So they bought a lot of people off. It doesn't. I'm sure the average cost of a Bulgarian politician and bureaucrat is not very high.
True enough.
I'm going out on a limb here. I know they're not very high here in Gainesville, Florida, for Christ's sake. So, looking at the way the Democratic Party runs the operations here in Florida, here in that town. So I have to believe in a place like Bulgaria, that's been bled dry by the EU. I just can't believe that it's not expensive. And I don't mean that as a slight against Bulgarians. It's just reality. People respond to incentives. Let's just get over ourselves. So, okay.
All right, we will leave it there on Bulgaria.
Thanks,
we will end the live stream. Once again, Tom, where can people find you?
TomLuongo.me or goldgoatsandguns.com. It goes to the same place. TFL1728 on Twitter, and be horrified because that's where I let it all fly. So,
right now,
and then we'll put Patreon as well, and you can find the links to all that stuff on my blog.
Yeah, and I will put the links as a pinned comment as well as in the description box for this video. Thank you very much, Tom, for a fantastic live stream.
Absolutely.
Alexander, thank you very much. Any final thoughts, everybody? Thank you, Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, and locals, our amazing locals community. And thank you to our moderators, Zarael, Lady Cosmica, Alan Watson, Reckless Abandon, and did I
great Brett
get
Harris
all the
is in the house.
moderators?
Hey, Brett.
Yeah, I think I got all the moderators there as well. Thank you very much to our moderators. Any final thoughts before we sign off for the weekend?
That is, as always, been a great privilege to have Tom here, because you give us this extra perspective, which I don't think we get much of on the Duran. Because I mean, you're there working in the markets. You know this world. I think a lot of us don't. I mean, I have been an observer of markets all my life. I've worked at the periphery. I've never actually worked in them. I've never done a sale or
the thing about it is there was a quote in one of in every month's Gold Dust and Guns newsletter. My partner Dexter Wright, he writes Article 2. So I write the big Article 1's, usually 3,000 words, and then Article 2 is Dexter's, and then there's a portfolio review, and then an editorial, right, and the bespoke editorial. I do the one-page editorial thing. In one of those articles a couple of months ago, Dexter was talking about something. He's like, I usually leave the vagaries of monetary policy and whatnot to Tom, not just because he's good at it, but because I actually think I'm horrified to believe that he actually likes it. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of do. So, we just go to to these places, and we're all interested in a particular subset of things, of, why these things are and why we believe they're important. And again, I praise the hive mind here in the Duran, my people everywhere, the Barnes and Fry, that hive mind of people. We all have our particular expertise. We all have our, the thing we do for our job every day or whatever. I have patrons who are deep in the banking system. I have, I have hedge fund managers. I have all sorts of people throwing little bon mots at me, little bits of perspective that just explode into massive these little things become big insights because someone made an offhand comment about something. And, because they didn't even believe that it was important. And I think that this is something that part of the reason why I love doing shows like this is that you get out of your own normal headspace, and the same thing is why these things are important. And I take time out of my day to do them. So this is very important what we do. And, and staying in the moment where we have to constantly be error checked as the experts, as the pundits by our community, I think keeps us all very honest and on our best game and engaged. So it's a privilege for me to come on the show as well. So
fantastic. It's great to have you here. Toy Chong, thank you for that super chat, and V-Plan, thank you for that super sticker. We will end it there. All the questions, I'll go through them, and whatever I missed getting to Tom, we will send it over to Tom, and he can answer.
And I'll do my best to respond in some way. I am always bandwidth constrained, though I did get the great email the other day from Elon Musk. My Starlink setup is on its way. I will have actual honest-to-God bandwidth soon.
All right. And John sends a super chat saying, thanks for this, gentlemen. You do a great service. Thank you, John, very, very much. We will end it there, everybody, and we will do a dedicated show as well to answer all the questions that we missed as well on this stream. And we will sign off for the weekend.
Bye, guys.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.